I had been planning this hike for months. It wasn't some famous trail or popular park. Instead, it was a narrow path I found on an old map, deep in a mountain range I'd never visited before. I wanted to get away from everything, the noise, the people, the constant pull of the city. I needed silence, solitude, and a challenge. The trail promised all of that. It was marked as difficult and unmaintained, which only made it more appealing. I packed lightly but carefully. A small tent, water purification tablets, some granola bars, a first aid kit, a knife, and a flashlight with extra batteries. I left my phone off to save battery, not expecting any service that far into the wilderness. I arrived early one clear morning, the sun barely touching the peaks. The air smelled fresh, full of pine and earth. The trailhead was a narrow opening in the trees, barely visible behind thick brush. I checked my gear once more, adjusted my pack, and stepped into the shadows of the forest. The path was rough and steep, roots and rocks tangled underfoot, forcing me to watch every step. The silence was deep. No birds, no wind, just the sound of my boots crunching on leaves and the occasional snap of a twig. I pushed on, climbing higher, the trees thinning as the air grew cooler and thinner. By midday, I reached a ridge with a view that took my breath away. Below, the valley stretched out, dotted with patches of green and winding streams shimmering in the sun. I sat on a rock and ate some of my food, sipping water carefully. The isolation felt good, peaceful, even sacred. No one would find me here if I got hurt or lost. It was a risk I knew and accepted. I pressed forward, following the trail as it wound along the mountain. At some point, the path faded. The markers on the trees grew sparse, and the terrain turned jagged. I had to scramble over boulders and navigate around fallen trees. My boots slid on loose gravel, and sweat dripped down my face. The sky was overcast now, the clouds gathering fast. I thought about turning back, but a stubborn part of me pushed onward. The weather shifted suddenly. A chill wind rose, cold and sharp. The clouds darkened, and soon, fat drops of rain began to fall, soaking the ground and turning the rocks slick. I pulled my rain jacket tight and kept moving, but the trail was disappearing entirely. I stopped and checked the map. According to it, I should be near a small lake, a place to rest and refill water, but all I saw was dense forest and thick brush. I moved carefully, trusting my instincts more than the map now. Then I heard it, a low growl from somewhere nearby. My heart jumped. I froze, listening. The growl came again, closer this time. It was deep and guttural, not like any bird or small animal. I looked around, scanning the trees, but saw nothing. The silence returned. I tried to calm my racing thoughts. Maybe it was a coyote or a wild dog. I held my knife ready and decided to keep moving, slowly and quietly. The rain intensified, cold and relentless. My clothes soaked through, the mud sucking at my boots. The trail became a slippery mess. I slipped and fell more than once, scraping my hands on sharp stones. The growling came again, more persistent now, and I knew I was not alone. Whatever was out there was following me, just beyond sight. I kept to the high ground, hoping to stay visible and avoid being cornered. I looked for shelter and finally found a narrow cave mouth, barely large enough for me to crawl inside. I squeezed in, trying to be as quiet as possible, listening. The growls circled outside, low and threatening. I didn't dare light my flashlight for fear it might attract something worse. I wrapped myself in my jacket and tried to slow my breathing. Hours passed, or maybe less. Time lost meaning in that dark, damp hole. The growling eventually faded. When I finally dared to peek out, the rain had stopped. The forest was quiet again. The sun was setting, casting long shadows through the trees. I knew I had to move, but my hands were numb and my legs weak. I started crawling out slowly, keeping my eyes and ears sharp. The path was gone. The map was useless. I was lost. I set off carefully, marking trees with my knife to find my way back. The sun disappeared behind the mountain, and the forest grew cold and dark fast. I pulled out my flashlight and turned it on. The beam was weak but enough to guide me. Then I saw it, footprints in the mud, large, deep, and fresh. I followed them, hoping they led to help or at least a clearer path. The prints led deeper into the forest. As I walked, I noticed broken branches and flattened grass, signs of movement. I felt eyes watching me. Panic rose again. The growling came back, distant but real. I tried to speed up but stumbled over a root and fell hard. My ankle twisted painfully. I bit back a scream and tried to stand. It was no use, the pain was sharp and blinding. I had to sit down and rest. I looked around desperately. No shelter, no help. The forest was closing in. The sky was dark, the stars hidden by clouds. The growling was closer now, just beyond a line of trees. I could see shadows moving. I knew I couldn't outrun whatever was out there. My only chance was to defend myself and stay calm. I grabbed a sturdy stick and sharpened the end with my knife. My heart pounded. The growls became snarls, and then suddenly, I saw them. A pack of wild dogs, maybe a dozen, eyes glowing in the dark. I stood slowly, holding my makeshift spear out in front of me. They circled, growling and barking, teeth flashing. I shouted and waved the stick, trying to look bigger and more dangerous. One dog lunged, and I jabbed the stick hard. It yelped and retreated. The rest hesitated, then backed off, disappearing into the night. I collapsed to the ground, exhausted and shaking. My ankle throbbed, but I was alive. I knew I couldn't stay there. I had to find my way out. At first light, I crawled back to the cave and rested until the sun warmed my body. Then, with slow, careful steps, I followed the creek downhill, hoping it led to civilization. After hours of crawling and stumbling, I saw smoke rising in the distance. I called out with what little strength I had. A small ranger station appeared through the trees. I was saved. The rangers treated my ankle, gave me food and water, and helped me contact my family. I learned later that the wild dogs were starving and had been driven closer to trails by hunters and loss of habitat. My hike had turned into a nightmare because I had underestimated the wilderness, its dangers, and how small and vulnerable a person can be. But I survived, and I would never forget the lessons the mountains taught me. I have always loved hiking. The quiet of the forest, the smell of pine needles, the feel of the earth under my boots. It all brings me a kind of peace I can't find anywhere else. I am the kind of person who plans everything carefully, knows the trails, studies the maps, and respects nature's power. But one trip, that careful nature and planning nearly cost me everything. It started as a normal spring weekend. The air was fresh, the trees were just starting to green, and the days were getting longer. I had been working a lot lately, feeling the weight of city life pressing down on me, so I decided I needed to get away, clear my head with a long hike. I chose a trail I had never been to before, a well-known trail, but one that was a bit more remote, in a national forest about a 3-hour drive from my town. I packed my usual gear: a sturdy backpack, water bottles, a map, compass, first aid kit, snacks, a small stove, and my trusted knife. I also packed a flashlight, a whistle, and a warm jacket just in case. I left early on a Saturday morning, driving out before dawn. The sun rose as I parked at the small trailhead parking lot. There were a few cars there, but it was quiet and peaceful. I took a deep breath and started on the trail. It was a narrow dirt path winding through tall pine trees and rocky hills. The trail had signs at intervals, telling the distance to the next rest point or scenic view. I felt good, my legs steady, my mind calm. The trail climbed gently at first, then grew steeper. The forest was alive with birdsong and the rustling of small animals in the underbrush. I saw squirrels darting between trees, and once, a flash of red as a fox crossed my path quickly. The air smelled like wet earth and pine sap, a smell I love. I stopped often to drink water and check my map. The sun climbed higher in the sky, warming the forest floor. After about 4 hours, I reached a clearing that the map marked as a good spot for a break. It was a small plateau with a view of a distant mountain range. I sat on a fallen log, ate some trail mix, and drank water. The quiet was soothing. I felt relaxed and ready to continue. The plan was to hike to a small lake further up the trail, camp there overnight, and hike back the next day. As I packed up and stood to leave, I noticed the sky was changing. Clouds were gathering, thick and gray. It didn't look like a light shower. It looked like a storm might be coming. I checked my watch early afternoon. I figured I had time to reach the lake before the weather got bad. I didn't want to turn back yet. I moved quickly, trying to make good time. The trail grew rougher. It wound higher up the mountain, through thicker trees and rocky paths. The wind began to pick up, pushing branches and leaves. The first drops of rain fell, light at first, then heavier. I pulled my jacket on and tightened my backpack straps. The rain cooled the air but made the ground slippery. As I climbed higher, the trail became harder to follow. The signs were fewer, some partly hidden by moss or broken branches. I checked my map and compass often. I was careful, but I started to feel uneasy. The forest seemed different now, quieter, darker under the thick clouds. The wind howled through the trees. The rain was steady, soaking my clothes and boots. Then I noticed something else. The trail had narrowed to a faint line, and there were no footprints or signs of other hikers. I hadn't seen another person for hours. I felt a knot of fear in my stomach, not because of animals or anything wild, but because I felt completely alone, and the forest seemed endless. I stopped to catch my breath and looked around. The trees here were taller and older. Moss hung from their branches like green curtains. The rain was heavy now, and I pulled out my flashlight. The dim light barely cut through the gloom. I checked my map again. The lake should be just ahead, maybe half a mile. But the trail was almost invisible. I kept walking, slow and careful. The rain made the rocks slippery, and the ground uneven. I stumbled once but caught myself. My boots squished in the wet earth. The smell of wet pine and cold stone filled my nose. I felt the chill creeping in despite my jacket. Then I saw it. A small wooden sign, broken and half buried in mud. It had the name of the lake on it, but the letters were faded and hard to read. I knew I was close. Relief flooded me. I moved faster, eager to reach the lake and find shelter. But the trail seemed to disappear. I looked ahead. There was no clear path, just thick bushes and trees. I felt a rush of panic. The storm was getting worse. Lightning flashed in the distance, and thunder rumbled low and deep. The rain turned into a downpour. I tried to push through the bushes, but they were thick and tangled. My jacket caught on branches. My hands scraped on sharp twigs. I was wet, cold, tired, and lost. My heart pounded. I knew I had to find the trail or shelter, fast. I stopped and tried to calm myself. I took out my compass and map again. The compass needle pointed north, and the lake was to the northwest. I started moving slowly in that direction, stepping carefully over wet roots and rocks. Suddenly, I heard a noise behind me, a crack of a branch breaking. I froze. My heart jumped. I spun around, flashlight beam cutting through the dark. Nothing, just trees and rain. I told myself it was nothing, a falling branch or an animal. But the sound was close. I kept moving, faster now, adrenaline sharp in my veins. The trail had to be here somewhere. I felt my phone in my pocket and pulled it out, hoping for signal. Nothing, no bars. The rain was blinding. Thunder crashed overhead. I slipped on a rock and fell hard. My hands and knees scraped against the rough stones. Pain flared in my right knee. I got up slowly, fighting the sting and dizziness. I had to keep going. Then I saw something. A small cave opening in the side of a rocky hill. It was dark, but it looked like shelter. I didn't want to stay outside in the storm any longer. My knee was hurting, and I was shivering. I moved toward the cave entrance, flashlight in hand. Inside, the air was cool and dry. The cave was small, maybe 10 feet deep and about 6 feet wide. I set my backpack down and sat on a flat rock, trying to rest. The storm raged outside, the sound of rain and thunder echoing in the cave. I was soaked, cold, and tired, but safe for now. I checked my gear. My jacket was soaked, my boots muddy. My water was almost gone, and my snacks were wet and soggy. I thought about my phone again. No signal, no way to call for help. I was alone. Hours passed. The storm finally began to die down, rain turning to a light drizzle. I decided I needed to move again, to find the trail and get out of there. I stood, testing my knee. It hurt, but it could hold weight. I stepped out of the cave and looked around. The forest was quiet, the clouds breaking to show a gray sky. The ground was muddy and covered with puddles. I checked my compass and started moving northwest, hoping to find the trail. The forest was still thick and wild. Branches dripped water, and the earth was soft underfoot. I walked slowly, eyes searching for any sign of the path. After about an hour, I saw something orange trail markers on trees. Relief. I followed them carefully. The trail led downhill and the forest began to thin. After another hour, I heard the faint sound of a river. The trail curved toward it. I reached a small wooden bridge crossing the river. The trail continued on the other side. I crossed the bridge carefully. The water was rushing fast from the storm runoff. The air smelled fresh and clean. I felt hope growing inside me. The trail was clear now, easier to follow. I kept walking until I saw a clearing ahead with parked cars, the end of the trail. A group of hikers was there, packing up and preparing to leave. I approached quietly, careful not to startle anyone. They noticed me and offered some food and water. I thanked them silently, my voice weak from the cold and exhaustion. One of them had a phone and helped me call for a ride. The drive back was long, and I sat quietly, staring out the window, thinking about how close I had come to being lost forever in that forest. When I got home, I cleaned my wounds, took care of my knee, and lay in bed for hours. The experience had changed me. I knew I had been lucky. The forest was beautiful but also dangerous. I had underestimated the power of the weather and the loneliness of the wild. From that day on, I never took a hike for granted. I always checked the weather carefully, always told someone my plans, and always carried extra supplies. The forest will always call me back, but now I go with more respect and caution. I learned that nature is not just a peaceful place to escape. It is a powerful, unpredictable force that demands our full attention. I had always been drawn to the mountains. There was something about the quiet, the way the trees stood tall and still, the wind whispering through the pines that felt like a balm to my restless mind. I spent most weekends on hiking trails, sometimes alone, sometimes with others. But this trip was supposed to be different. I wanted to challenge myself, so I chose a remote trail deep in the wilderness, one that few people took. It was a stretch of land I had heard about from older hikers, steep, difficult, but beautiful, promised solitude and adventure. I packed carefully, my backpack full of essentials: water, snacks, a small first aid kit, a map, a compass, and a flashlight. I wore sturdy boots, layered clothes, and carried a walking stick I found on the last trip. The morning was cold but clear as I started my hike. The sun was just rising behind the trees, casting long shadows over the dirt path. The air smelled fresh, with the faint scent of pine and damp earth. Birds chirped in the distance. My steps were steady and rhythmic, the only sound apart from the occasional rustle of leaves. The trail was narrow and uneven, twisting between tall trees and rocky outcrops. Every few minutes I stopped to look around, taking in the vastness of the forest. There was no one else in sight. As I climbed higher, the terrain became rougher. The dirt path gave way to loose stones and patches of moss-covered roots. My legs grew tired, but I kept moving. The higher elevation meant cooler air, and the sunlight filtered through the branches, creating patterns on the ground. I took slow sips of water, careful not to drink too fast. My backpack felt heavier with every step, but I pushed on. I had read that the best views were near the top, and I wanted to reach that point before noon. Around midday, I found a small clearing with a flat rock. I sat down to rest and eat a simple lunch, a sandwich and some dried fruit. The silence was almost complete, except for the occasional call of a distant hawk. I noticed the valley below, green and sprawling, with a thin river threading through it like a silver ribbon. The wind picked up slightly, cold and sharp, sending a chill through me. I pulled my jacket tighter and checked my map to confirm my location. The path ahead looked steeper but manageable. I stood up and continued, moving carefully over loose stones. Suddenly, the ground beneath me shifted slightly. I froze, my heart pounding. A small rock slide? No, it was a patch of wet moss and mud that gave way. I stepped back, looking down the slope. It was steep and rocky. One wrong step here could mean serious injury. I decided to go slower, placing each foot carefully. As the afternoon wore on, the trail became less distinct. The trees grew closer, branches brushing against my arms. The sunlight dimmed as the canopy thickened. I could hear the faint sound of running water somewhere to my right, maybe a stream. The air was cooler, almost damp. My boots were starting to feel wet from crossing small puddles and damp ground. The path twisted unexpectedly, and I realized I had to pay more attention to the map and compass to avoid getting lost. That's when I noticed something unusual. A pile of rocks stacked carefully next to the trail. A cairn. I had seen them before, used by hikers to mark the way. But this one seemed out of place, more deliberate. It was taller than usual, made with smooth stones. I thought maybe someone else had been here recently. I adjusted my route slightly to pass the cairn and kept walking. But after a few minutes, I saw another one, then another spaced every few hundred feet. It was strange. Too many markers and not in the usual pattern. I paused, looked around carefully. The forest felt heavier now, the shadows deeper, though it was still early afternoon. A feeling of unease crept in. I wasn't sure why. Maybe it was just the isolation. Maybe it was because the trail had become so faint I was losing my bearings. I checked the map again. The cairns weren't marked on it. I began to wonder if someone else had made a different path or if these markers were misleading. The trail forked unexpectedly. Both paths looked similar, overgrown, narrow, and rocky. The cairns pointed along one path, but the map suggested the other. I decided to follow the map and take the left fork, hoping it would lead me toward the summit. The trees here were older, their trunks wide and gnarled. The air smelled wetter. The ground was softer, covered with pine needles and fallen leaves. I stepped carefully to avoid slipping. After about 20 minutes, I came to a small stream cutting across the path. It was deeper and faster than I expected. I took off my boots to cross carefully, dipping my feet in the cold water. The stones beneath were slippery. I reached the other side safely but noticed my boots were soaked. The thought of continuing with wet feet was unpleasant, but there was no choice. I put my boots back on and moved on. The trail grew steeper again, winding upward between rock walls. The sky was beginning to darken with clouds, and a slight drizzle started. The rain was light at first, but soon it became steady. The trees provided some shelter, but I was getting wet. My clothes clung to my skin. The cold began to bite through my layers. I thought about turning back, but I was close to the top, or so I hoped. As I climbed, I noticed something else. Footprints in the mud, but they were strange. Too large to be mine, but not like animal tracks. They were deep and spaced far apart, like heavy boots. I followed them for a while, curious but cautious. The prints headed in the same direction I was going but stopped abruptly near a large fallen tree. I circled around, looking for signs of anyone else. That's when I heard the sound. A crack, like a branch breaking, coming from deeper in the forest. I froze, listening. The rain masked some sounds but couldn't hide this. My heart raced, quickened my pace, trying to keep calm. The path narrowed, with dense bushes pressing in on either side. The rain made everything slick and treacherous. Suddenly, I stumbled on a root and almost fell. My hands grabbed at a bush, tearing my jacket sleeve. I cursed silently and kept moving, desperate to reach the top and find shelter. The sky darkened further, turning a dull gray, and thunder rumbled in the distance. I realized a storm was coming. The forest grew quieter again. The rain was falling harder now. My vision blurred as water dripped down my face. The path seemed endless, twisting and turning. I tried to keep track of my bearings, but the trees all looked the same. The cairns were gone now, and the footprints vanished too. I was alone. After what felt like hours, the path ended at the edge of a cliff. The view was breathtaking but terrifying in the storm. Wind whipped past me, cold and sharp. Lightning flashed in the distance, illuminating the valley below. I took a deep breath, trying to steady my nerves. There was no shelter here. I had no choice but to turn back. I started down the trail, careful to avoid slipping. The rain and wind made it hard to see. Suddenly, the ground gave way under my foot. I tried to catch myself, but I slid down a steep bank and tumbled over rocks and branches. When I stopped moving, pain shot through my ankle. I tried to stand, but it was swollen and sharp. I was injured. Panic set in. I was miles from the trailhead, with no phone signal and worsening weather. I took out my first aid kit and wrapped my ankle as best I could. The cold seeped into my bones. I knew I had to get help, but how? I tried to move slowly, limping back the way I came. Every step was agony. The storm was relentless now, rain soaking me completely. The trees shook in the wind. I kept looking for the trail markers or any sign of people. The forest felt endless and unforgiving. Hours passed. Darkness fell, and the forest became a maze of shadows and shapes. My flashlight flickered, barely cutting through the blackness. I sat down on a rock, exhausted and cold. I thought about what could happen if I stayed here. I thought about what might have made those footprints earlier. The feeling of being watched came back, heavier this time. Suddenly, a distant shout echoed through the trees. I froze, listening. Could it be someone else? Help? I called out weakly but got no answer. I forced myself to stand, using my walking stick for support. Following the sound, I moved toward it, hoping it wasn't a trick of my mind. After some time, I saw a faint light through the trees. It was a campfire with figures moving near it. Relief flooded me. I limped faster, calling out. The people welcomed me silently, offering warmth and dry clothes. They were experienced hikers like me and helped me make a splint for my ankle. The next morning, they led me back down the mountain to safety. The storm had passed. I was exhausted but alive. The forest had been beautiful but dangerous. I realized how unprepared I had been for the worst. The footprints and cairns were probably left by another group, maybe warning hikers of the trail's dangers. I never found out who they were. The day I decided to hike alone into the northern mountains started just like any other day. The sky was clear, the sun bright but not too hot, and the air smelled fresh with the scent of pine trees and damp earth. I had been planning this hike for weeks, maybe even months, researching trails and maps, reading about the terrain and weather. I wanted to push myself, to test my limits, and to be completely alone in the wilderness for a couple of days. No distractions, no phones, no noise. I packed my backpack carefully the night before. Water, food, first aid, a compass, a map, a flashlight with extra batteries, warm clothes, a rain jacket, a knife, a lighter, and a small tent. I made sure everything was light enough to carry but enough to keep me safe. I told a friend roughly where I was going but didn't give a detailed itinerary. I liked the idea of mystery, even if it was just for me. I started early in the morning, around 7 a.m., walking through the small forest trail near the base of the mountains. The trail was narrow and winding, with roots sticking out and rocks that made my steps uneven. I walked slowly, paying attention to each step, listening to the sounds of birds and the rustling of leaves. Every now and then, a deer or a rabbit would dart away, disappearing into the trees. The first few hours were peaceful. The trail climbed steadily but wasn't too steep. I stopped several times to rest and drink water. I took pictures of interesting plants and the landscape. The sun moved slowly across the sky, and the temperature stayed comfortable. Around noon, I reached a small clearing where I ate a sandwich and rested on a fallen log. From there, the trail became tougher. The path narrowed further and climbed steeper up the rocky side of the mountain. I had to use my hands sometimes to balance on the rocks. My legs ached, and I felt sweat running down my face, but the view made it worth the effort. I could see the valley below, a sea of green trees and a winding river shining in the sunlight. As I climbed higher, I noticed the weather changing. The sky that had been clear in the morning was now dotted with thick, gray clouds. A cold wind began to blow, making me zip up my jacket. I checked my watch about 3 p.m. I still had plenty of daylight left, but I also knew the weather in the mountains could change fast. I pressed on, wanting to reach a small campsite I had read about in a guidebook. It was supposed to be at the top of the ridge, with a good spot for a tent and a clear view of the stars at night. I imagined sitting there in the dark, warm by the fire, listening to the silence around me. Suddenly, the wind picked up sharply, and I heard the first drops of rain. I pulled on my rain jacket and quickened my pace, hoping to reach the campsite before the rain got heavy. The trail was now slippery with wet rocks and mud. My boots squished as I walked, and I had to be extra careful not to slip. About 20 minutes later, the rain turned into a steady downpour. I could barely see the trail ahead, and the wind howled through the trees like a wild animal. I was soaked within minutes, my clothes sticking to me, my hands cold and numb. I reached the ridge just as the rain started to slow, but the campsite was nowhere to be seen. The thick fog had rolled in, hiding everything around me. The guidebook description was vague, and the trail markers were missing or covered with moss. I looked around, trying to find a flat spot to set up my tent, but the ground was uneven and wet. I felt a sudden unease. The mountain looked different in the fog, less friendly, more dangerous. I tried to tell myself it was just the weather and my imagination. I took out my map and compass, trying to get my bearings. According to the map, I was close to the campsite, maybe a few hundred feet away, but I couldn't see it. I decided to move slowly, hoping to spot it. Then, without warning, I slipped on a wet rock and fell hard on my side. Pain shot through my ankle, and I knew something was wrong. I tried to stand, but the pain made me cry out silently. My ankle was swollen, and I couldn't put weight on it. Panic started to creep in. I was alone, far from help, in the middle of a mountain ridge with thick fog and fading daylight. I tried to calm myself down. I had my phone, but no signal. I had my flashlight, water, and food, but I wasn't sure how long I could stay here. I decided the safest thing was to stay put and try to make a shelter. I took out my tent, but the stakes wouldn't hold in the rocky ground. The wind was picking up again, and the temperature was dropping fast. I wrapped myself in my emergency blanket and huddled under a large tree for some shelter from the rain. The hours passed slowly. The darkness grew deeper, and the sounds of the forest changed. I heard branches creaking and the distant howl of what I hoped was just wind. My thoughts went wild. What if no one found me? What if I couldn't move my ankle? I fought back tears and tried to stay warm. Somewhere late at night, I thought I heard footsteps nearby, slow and careful. I held my breath, afraid and alert. The fog was thick, and I couldn't see anything. The footsteps moved away, and I was left alone again, shivering in the cold. Morning came slowly, but with it, a faint sun trying to break through the clouds. I tried to move my ankle again. The pain was still there, but a bit less. I managed to stand with help from my backpack strap and started to limp carefully down the mountain, following the compass and the map as best as I could. Took hours, every step painful, but I kept going. I kept reminding myself to stay calm and steady. Eventually, the trees thinned, and I saw the faint outline of a dirt road below. I followed it until I reached a small ranger station where a man helped me call for rescue. The experience taught me how unforgiving nature can be and how important it is to be prepared but also realistic about my limits. I realized how easy it is to get lost or hurt when you're alone in the wild and how every small decision matters. Looking back, I was lucky to survive without serious injury. The mountain had tested me hard, but I learned more about respect, caution, and survival than I ever expected. I had been planning this hiking trip for months. The idea was to get away from the city, from the noise and the pressure, and just spend a few days alone in the wilderness. The trail I chose was deep in the mountains, far from any main roads or towns. The map showed a path winding through thick forests, steep hills, and rocky clearings. I liked that it wasn't crowded. I wanted to test myself. I packed my backpack carefully, making sure I had enough food, water, clothes, and some emergency gear. I brought a small first aid kit, a flashlight, a map, a compass, and my phone. though I wasn't sure if I'd have any signal once I was far into the trail. I wore sturdy hiking boots, a jacket, and a hat. The weather forecast said it would be clear and cool, perfect for hiking. The first day was easy. The trail started at the edge of a small parking lot by a ranger station. I walked under tall pine trees, their needles soft beneath my feet. Birds sang in the branches. The air was fresh, smelling of pine and earth. I passed a small creek with clear water that ran over smooth stones. Every now and then, I stopped to rest, took a sip of water, and checked the map. I saw signs warning hikers to stay on the trail because of wildlife, especially bears. I had heard stories before of hikers who got lost or hurt, but I felt prepared. I wasn't worried. As the afternoon went on, the trail climbed steadily. The trees grew taller, thicker. The forest floor was covered in moss and fallen leaves. I saw a few deer run through the underbrush far ahead. The sunlight filtered through the branches, making patches of gold on the ground. I set up camp near a small clearing beside a calm stream. The sound of the water was peaceful, and I felt good to be alone. I cooked some food over a small stove, ate quietly, and then lay back on my sleeping mat to look up at the stars. The sky was clear, and the stars were bright, far from city lights. That night, the forest felt alive. I could hear owls hooting in the distance, the rustle of small animals moving in the dark, the crackle of branches. I reminded myself to stay calm and remember that this was nature, not danger. The next morning, I packed up early. The trail was steeper now, winding up the mountain. The air was cooler, thinner. My legs ached a little from the climb, but I pushed on. I felt proud, like I was doing something real and important. About halfway through the second day, I noticed something odd. The trail markers were missing or damaged. The painted stripes on trees were faded or gone. I stopped and looked at my map. The path should have turned right at the next fork, but there was no clear sign. I felt a flicker of unease, but I trusted the map. I chose the path that looked more worn. I walked carefully, paying attention to landmarks. The trees grew thicker. The trail became narrower. The sun was starting to lower behind the mountains. After walking for what felt like hours, I realized something was wrong. The trail was disappearing. I could barely see where it went. My heart started to beat faster. I stopped. I pulled out my phone to check the GPS. No signal. The battery was low after 2 days. I sat down on a fallen log to think. I tried to remember what I had read about getting lost in the woods. The advice was to stay calm, stay put, and try to find the last known trail. But I was unsure where that was. I looked around. The forest was dense, trees standing like silent guards. The light was dimming. The temperature was dropping. I felt the first real cold seep into my bones. I decided to turn back. I thought maybe I had gone the wrong way. I tried to retrace my steps, but everything looked the same. The trees, the rocks, the moss, all repeated in endless patterns. I felt disoriented. I walked slowly, trying to mark my path by breaking branches or leaving small piles of stones. But it was hard to be sure where I had been. As night fell, the forest became dark and strange. The sounds were louder. Every snap of a twig, every rustle in the bushes made me jump. I was alone, far from help. I tried to light my flashlight. It flickered, weak and unreliable. I cursed myself for not bringing spare batteries. I found a small hollow beside a big tree and settled there for the night. I wrapped myself tightly in my jacket, trying to stay warm. I ate some trail mix and drank water slowly. Sleep was difficult. I kept hearing noises. I tried to remind myself that they were probably animals, squirrels, raccoons, maybe a fox. But the fear was creeping in. Fear of the unknown, fear of being lost. The night passed slowly. At times, I felt the cold more sharply. My muscles ached from walking and sitting on hard ground. I thought about how much I wished I had someone with me, or at least a clear trail. When the first light came, I packed up quickly. My plan was to keep moving downhill, hoping to find a road or the ranger station. As I walked, the sun made the forest glow warmly. The birds were louder, and the forest seemed less threatening. I tried to focus on the sounds and the light, not on the fear. Several hours later, I heard the faint hum of an engine. My heart jumped. I headed toward the sound, pushing through bushes and stepping over roots. At last, I reached a narrow dirt road. It was rough and overgrown, but clearly made by people. I followed it slowly, and after about half an hour, I saw a pickup truck parked near a small cabin. The man who came out looked surprised to see me. He told me the road was private and not often used. He gave me water and a phone charger. His radio was set to a local ranger channel. I called the ranger station. They sent a small team to find my car and check the trail. I waited in the cabin, feeling a mixture of relief and exhaustion. When the ranger arrived, I told them what had happened. They said the trail had been damaged recently by storms and that some markers had disappeared. They warned me about how easy it was to get lost in those woods, especially when the paths are unclear. I felt grateful to be safe but also shaken. The experience reminded me how small and fragile I was in the wild, how careful and prepared I needed to be. I left the next day with the ranger back to the parking lot. The mountains looked peaceful again, but I knew I had seen a darker side of the forest, one that was quiet but dangerous. I learned that nature demands respect, not just admiration, and sometimes even the best plans can go wrong in the wilderness. I set out early in the morning, just as the sun was rising, with a backpack filled with the usual essentials: water, food, a first aid kit, a map, and a compass. I was hiking in a forest that was known for its dense trees and rough terrain, miles away from the nearest town. The trail I planned to take was a loop, about 20 miles in total, and was supposed to be challenging but rewarding, with stunning views at the highest points. The air was crisp and cool as I started. The forest was quiet except for the crunch of leaves under my boots and the occasional call of a bird. At first, the path was clear and well-marked with small painted signs on the trees. I felt good, strong, and prepared. The sky was blue with a few white clouds drifting lazily. I walked steadily, stopping sometimes to drink water or adjust my pack. The trees grew thicker as I moved deeper in, tall pines and firs shading the path. I could hear a distant stream somewhere to my right, the soft rush of water blending with the forest sounds. I was careful to stay on the trail, checking my map frequently. So far, everything was normal. After a few hours, I reached a clearing where the sun broke through the trees in golden shafts. I sat on a fallen log and ate some granola bars, enjoying the peace around me. The view was beautiful. The forest stretched endlessly in every direction, a sea of green. I rested there for a while, feeling the calmness settle into my bones. Then I decided to continue. I had to keep moving to finish before dark. The path began to climb more steeply now, the ground rocky and uneven. My boots slipped on loose stones, and I had to grab branches to steady myself. The trees became less dense as I gained elevation, and I could see glimpses of the valley far below through the branches. Suddenly, I noticed something strange. The trail ahead looked less used, almost like no one had passed this way in a long time. The paint marks on the trees were fading, and some were missing altogether. The forest seemed to grow darker despite the daylight. I told myself it was normal. Trails sometimes get less clear in harder sections. I checked my compass to make sure I was still on the right direction, pointed northeast the way I wanted to go. I pushed forward carefully, stepping over roots and fallen branches. Then I heard a noise, a soft crackling sound coming from the bushes to my left. I froze. It wasn't the wind or a bird. It sounded like something moving, something trying to stay hidden. I looked into the shadows but saw nothing. I waited for a minute, my heart pounding. Nothing happened. I told myself it was probably a deer or some small animal. I relaxed slightly and kept walking. The noise stopped, but the feeling of being watched stayed with me. The trail started to slope downward. The air grew cooler, damper. I saw patches of moss on the rocks and the smell of wet earth. The forest was thick again. I kept my pace steady, focusing on my footing. Then, without warning, I slipped on a mossy rock. I fell hard on my side, pain shooting through my ribs. I lay there for a moment, catching my breath, feeling the rough ground against my skin. My pack had slid off, spilling some items. I gathered them slowly, testing my body. No broken bones, just bruised and sore. I stood up carefully, leaning on my hiking stick. I considered turning back, but knew it would take longer and I wanted to finish the hike. So I kept going, moving slower, more cautiously. The path became less distinct again. I reached a fork where the trail split in two directions. I checked my map, but it was hard to read with the low light filtering through the trees. Both paths looked rough, overgrown with bushes and fallen branches. I felt a flicker of doubt. I chose the left path because it seemed a little wider and less obstructed. After a few minutes, I realized I hadn't seen any trail markers for a long time. The trees looked unfamiliar. My compass showed I was still roughly heading northeast, but I felt uneasy. I kept walking, trying to stay calm. Then I noticed something else. The noise of the forest was fading. No birds, no wind, no animals. It was like the forest had gone silent. The silence was heavier than before, pressing on me. I quickened my pace, hoping to find a clearer trail or a sign of other hikers. Suddenly, I heard a low growl behind me. I froze, turning slowly. There was nothing there, but the sound had been close. My breath caught. I gripped my hiking stick tighter. The growling came again, this time louder, closer. I spun around to face the direction, but saw only shadows and trees. I started walking faster, trying to put distance between me and the noise. Then, I saw a large shape moving between the trees, dark, low to the ground, fast. My heart leapt. It was an animal bigger than a dog, maybe a wolf or a mountain lion. I wasn't sure. Fear gripped me. I remembered reading about how to behave if you meet a big predator. Stay calm, don't run, make yourself look bigger, back away slowly. I raised my arms, made myself taller. The animal stopped moving for a moment, watching me. I held my ground, my eyes locked on it. Then it snarled and lunged. I raised my stick just in time and hit it hard on the nose. It yelped and backed off, disappearing into the trees. I stood there, shaking, heart racing, watching for any sign of it coming back. When nothing happened, I started moving again, faster now, careful not to trip or fall. The forest stayed quiet as I made my way. After what felt like an hour, I finally reached a wider trail, the main path. I followed it down the mountain, relief washing over me with every step. The sun was setting when I emerged from the trees near a small parking lot. A few cars were there and I felt safe again. I sat on a bench and drank water, trying to calm my nerves. I realized how lucky I was. That moment with the animal could have ended badly. I learned that day how quickly the forest can turn from peaceful to dangerous, how thin the line is between adventure and harm. I didn't see the animal again, and I never went back on that trail. But I never forgot the silence, the growl, or the fear that gripped me deep inside. It was real, and it stayed with me long after I left the woods. I had been planning this hike for months, looking forward to a weekend away from everything. No phone, no internet, no city noise, just me and the forest. I'm not new to hiking, but I prefer solo trips. It's peaceful and lets me think clearly. The trail I picked was a known one, popular but long and winding through thick woods and steep hills. I thought I was prepared. I checked the weather twice, packed extra food and water, a map, compass, flashlight, a first aid kit, and even a whistle just in case. The morning started crisp and clear. The sun filtered softly through the pine trees as I began my ascent. The air was cool, fresh with the scent of damp earth and pine needles. Birds called occasionally, but the forest was mostly quiet. The trail was rocky, covered in loose stones and fallen leaves that crunched underfoot. I moved carefully, steadying myself against the uneven ground. About 2 hours into the hike, I stopped for a break near a small creek. The water was clear and cold, trickling over smooth stones. I refilled my bottle, ate a granola bar, and sat on a mossy log to rest. The forest around me felt calm and inviting. Sunlight dappled the ground, and I noticed a few squirrels darting between trees. I checked my map and compass. Everything looked right. The trail continued uphill beyond the creek, so I packed up and set off again. As I climbed, the trail grew narrower and steeper. I kept my pace steady, breathing deeply, taking in the beauty around me. After another hour, I reached a ridge with a stunning view of the valley below. The sun was higher now, warming the air, and I felt good. I snapped a few pictures with my phone and started down the other side of the ridge, following the trail markers I had read about. But after some time, I began to notice something strange. The trail markers, small colored ribbons tied to tree branches, started to get fewer and farther between. I stopped more often, scanning the trees and the ground for any sign of the path. The trail was covered in leaves and fallen branches. It was harder to tell where it went. I checked the map again. The line showing the trail looked clear, but I was starting to feel uneasy. I told myself I must have missed a marker. Maybe the trail had changed or been damaged by storms. I backtracked a little to the last clear marker, but it wasn't there. The trees looked all the same. The forest seemed to close in around me. My heart rate quickened, but I tried to stay calm. I looked at my compass, hoping it would guide me back. I kept moving, but soon I realized I didn't recognize anything anymore. The landscape had no distinct features, just trees, underbrush, and shadows. The sky was getting dimmer under the thick canopy, though it was still early afternoon. I decided to stop and think. Sitting on a fallen log, I pulled out my phone to check for signal. Nothing. No bars. That was expected this far in, but it still sent a chill down my spine. I thought about the whistle and the flashlight, but I didn't want to call for help unless I was sure I was lost. I tried to retrace my steps, but after walking back for half an hour, I was even more confused. The forest was dense and tangled, and I was starting to feel tired and thirsty. My water bottle was nearly empty, and my stomach was growling. I realized I hadn't eaten since the granola bar hours ago. The sun began to sink lower, casting long shadows and making the forest darker. The temperature dropped, and a chill settled in my bones. I didn't want to spend the night out here unprepared, but I didn't see any clear way back to the trailhead. I tried to stay calm and rational. I remembered the basics from survival guides. Find shelter, conserve energy, ration food and water, and stay put if lost. I looked around for a safe place to stay for the night. The forest floor was covered with dead leaves and sticks, and the trees were thick. I gathered some dry branches and built a small shelter against a fallen tree. It wasn't perfect, but it would keep some wind off me. I found a small patch of moss and spread my jacket over it to lie down. I drank the last of my water slowly. My hands shook from cold and fatigue. I wrapped myself tightly in my jacket and tried to rest, but the dark forest felt alive with strange sounds. The rustle of small animals, the crack of twigs, and the occasional call of birds made me jump. Sleep was hard to come by. I kept waking up every few minutes, listening for anything unusual. My mind ran through every possible danger. Getting injured, running out of food and water, being stuck here for days. I tried to focus on staying positive. In the morning, I woke to the pale light filtering through the branches. My throat was dry and scratchy. I ate one of my remaining energy bars and drank a little water from the creek nearby, careful to filter it through my bandana. I decided I had to keep moving. Staying in one place too long might be dangerous. I studied my map again. The trail was supposed to curve south along the ridge. I used my compass to head in that direction, hoping to find a clearing or the trail itself. I moved slowly, marking my path by tying pieces of cloth to branches so I wouldn't go in circles. Hours passed. The forest seemed endless. I stumbled over roots and rocks, scraped my legs on thorny bushes, and my feet ached inside my boots. The sun moved across the sky, and the temperature rose. I drank sparingly from my bottle and snacked on the last bits of food. My legs trembled with exhaustion, but I kept pushing forward. At one point, I thought I saw a faint trail in the distance, a narrow dirt path with occasional footprints. I hurried toward it, heart pounding. But as I got closer, it vanished under a thick patch of brambles. I cursed my luck but kept moving. By late afternoon, my energy was nearly gone. I stopped at a shallow stream to drink and rest. I realized I had no way to tell how far I had traveled or which direction I was truly heading. The forest looked the same in every direction. Panic crept in, but I forced myself to breathe deeply and think clearly. I remembered the emergency whistle. I blew it 3 times, paused, then 3 more times. No response. I tried shouting, but my voice sounded weak and small in the vast forest. I realized I needed to conserve my strength and water and try to find a higher vantage point to get a better view. I spotted a hill nearby with a rocky outcrop at the top. It looked steep but climbable. I forced myself up, hands and feet scrambling over stones. At the summit, I looked around. The forest stretched endlessly in all directions. No signs of roads, buildings, or people. The sky was starting to turn orange with the setting sun. I knew I couldn't stay up here. I had to find shelter again, somewhere safe. I picked a spot among thick bushes, hidden from sight, and settled in. The temperature dropped quickly. My teeth chattered despite my jacket. I curled into a ball and tried to stay warm. That night was worse than the first. The cold bit into me, and every noise seemed louder. My mind played tricks, but I fought off fear by focusing on breathing and counting seconds. Morning came slowly. I woke stiff and hungry. I had no food left except some crumbs of the granola bar I had hidden in my pocket. My water was almost gone. I decided I had to keep moving south, trusting the compass. If I could find a river or a clearing, I might be able to follow it to safety. The forest grew denser as I walked. I had to push through thick branches, step over fallen logs, and avoid thorny plants. My boots were soaked from crossing small streams, and blisters had formed on my feet. As the day wore on, I became weaker. I tripped and fell several times but managed to get up. I knew giving up was not an option. In the late afternoon, I heard a faint noise. At first, I thought it was the wind, but it sounded more like voices. I froze, listening carefully. It was distant but definitely human. My heart leapt. I followed the sound cautiously, moving toward it as quietly as I could. After what felt like hours, I reached a clearing where I saw a dirt road and a small cabin. Smoke rose from a chimney. I waved my arms and shouted, desperate for help. A man came out, surprised to see me. He gave me water and food and called the local search and rescue team. I stayed at the cabin that night, safe and warm for the first time in days. The rescue team found my family waiting anxiously at the trailhead. I was dehydrated, exhausted, and had several cuts and bruises, but otherwise okay. Looking back, I realized how easily things could have gone wrong. I had underestimated how quickly a familiar trail could disappear, how lost a person can feel in the wilderness, and how important it is to be prepared for anything. That hike taught me respect for nature's power and unpredictability, and a deep appreciation for the safety of home. I had planned this hike for months. The day was clear, the sky a bright, washed out blue with just a few thin clouds drifting lazily. I had checked the weather forecast over and over, making sure the conditions were perfect. I wanted this hike to be peaceful, a chance to get away from everything. No distractions, no noise, just me and the forest. The trailhead was easy enough to find, nestled at the edge of a dense forest that stretched for miles. The trees were tall and thick, mostly pines and firs, their needles brushing softly against one another in the light breeze. I laced up my boots tightly, shouldered my pack, and started walking. The air smelled clean and sharp, with a faint hint of pine sap. The ground beneath my feet was soft with fallen needles, muffling my steps. At first, everything felt calm and inviting. The trail was wide and clear, with small wildflowers dotting the edges and birds singing high up in the branches. I passed by a bubbling creek, its cold water rushing over smooth stones. I stopped for a moment to cup my hands and drink, the water refreshing and cool on my tongue. I kept going, deeper into the forest. The trees grew closer together here, their trunks thick and gnarled. The sunlight filtered through the canopy in bright, patchy beams, lighting up the moss and ferns that carpeted the forest floor. The air smelled richer here, damp and earthy, with the faint scent of decaying leaves. The trail began to climb steadily, winding up a ridge. My breathing grew heavier with the effort, but the view opened up as I gained height. Through the breaks in the trees, I could see the valley below, a patchwork of fields and distant roads, a small town nestled between hills. It looked peaceful from up here, quiet and untouched. After about 2 hours of steady hiking, I reached a small clearing near the top of the ridge. I sat down on a fallen log to catch my breath and eat a snack. The wind was cooler up here, brushing against my face and tugging at the edges of my jacket. I looked around, taking in the wide open sky and the endless stretch of forest below. It felt like I was the only person for miles, completely alone. After a few minutes, I got up and continued along the trail. The path narrowed here, rocky and uneven, winding between boulders and twisted tree roots. I had to watch my footing carefully. The trees were older here, their bark rough and cracked, with thick layers of moss clinging to the sides. As I walked, I noticed something odd. The forest grew quieter. The birds stopped singing. The breeze died down. It was an eerie stillness, like the forest was holding its breath. I stopped and looked around, trying to see if something was wrong. There was no sign of animals, no rustling in the underbrush. The silence was heavy, pressing down on me. I felt a strange tension creeping over my skin, like something unseen was watching me. I shook the feeling off, telling myself it was just the quiet, nothing more. I kept moving, my footsteps crunching softly on the dry leaves and twigs. The trail began to descend now, steep and slippery in places. I took my time, carefully placing each step. Suddenly, my foot slipped on a patch of loose gravel, and I lost my balance. My hands shot out to catch myself, but I hit a rock hard, scraping my palms and twisting my ankle painfully. I gritted my teeth against the sharp pain but managed to stay upright. I took a moment to rest, pressing my hand against the twisted ankle. It was swollen and throbbing, making each step more difficult. I considered turning back, but I was still far from the trailhead. There was no one else around to help if I got stuck. I decided to keep going slowly. I took out my phone to check the time and my location, but there was no signal. The remote forest blocked any connection. I felt a small pang of unease again. If something went wrong, I was on my own. I moved forward carefully, limping but determined. The trail curved sharply and came out onto a rocky slope. The trees thinned out here, revealing a sheer drop on one side. I stayed close to the safer edge, moving cautiously. The wind picked up, whipping cold against my face. Dark clouds were gathering overhead, blotting out the sun. I felt a tight knot form in my stomach. The weather was turning fast, and I was exposed up here with no shelter. I pushed on, looking for a place to take cover if the storm hit. Up ahead, I saw what looked like an old ranger's cabin, half hidden by trees and vines. It was small and weathered, with peeling paint and a sagging roof. I hurried towards it, hoping to get inside before the rain started. The door creaked loudly as I pushed it open. Inside, the cabin smelled damp and musty. Dust covered the old wooden floor, and cobwebs hung in the corners. A small wood stove sat cold in the corner, and a few broken chairs were scattered about. I dropped my pack and sat down, relieved to be out of the wind. I pulled out my first aid kit and cleaned my scraped hands, wrapping them in gauze. I propped my ankle up on a chair, trying to ease the swelling. Outside, the storm broke. Rain hammered against the roof, and the wind howled through the broken windows. The cabin shook with each gust. I felt the cold creeping in despite the shelter. I pulled my jacket tighter and waited, listening to the storm rage outside. Hours passed. The rain slowed to a steady drizzle, then stopped altogether. The forest was silent again, except for the occasional drip of water from the roof. I decided I couldn't stay here forever. My ankle still hurt badly, but I had to get back down the mountain before dark. I packed up and stepped outside. The trail was slick with mud and leaves, making each step treacherous. I moved slowly, leaning heavily on my hiking stick. The sky was dark and gray, and the forest seemed colder now. As I rounded a bend, I spotted something lying on the ground ahead. At first, I thought it was a fallen branch, but as I got closer, I realized it was a backpack, torn and dirty. I froze. The backpack looked recent, but there was no one around. My heart started pounding. I called out, but my voice was swallowed by the thick forest. I searched the area carefully but found no sign of anyone. The backpack was empty, except for a water bottle and a crumpled map. It was clear someone had been here, maybe lost or hurt. I felt a chill run down my spine. What if the owner was still nearby, needing help? Or worse, what if something bad had happened? I kept moving, more alert now, my eyes scanning the shadows. The forest seemed darker and more foreboding with every step. Suddenly, I heard a faint sound, a snapping twig behind me. I spun around, but saw nothing. The trees swayed silently. I quickened my pace, trying to shake the feeling that I was being followed. The trail wound downward, and the trees thinned again, revealing a small clearing ahead. In the clearing, I saw fresh footprints in the mud, too large to be mine. They led off the trail into the thick brush. My heart raced. Someone was close. I wanted to turn back, but my ankle was weak, and the light was fading fast. I took a deep breath and decided to follow the footprints, hoping to find the person or at least understand what was going on. The underbrush was thick, snagging at my clothes and making each step harder. The footprints were fresh, but they stopped suddenly near a fallen tree. I peered around the tree and froze. There, half hidden in the shadows, was a man. His clothes were torn, and his face was smeared with dirt and blood. He looked exhausted, his eyes wild and desperate. I wanted to help, but he recoiled at the sight of me and darted away into the forest. I called out, but he didn't stop. I watched him disappear among the trees. I was torn between following him or heading back to the trailhead. Then I heard a voice calling from far off, distant, muffled, but urgent. I followed the sound until I reached a small dirt road. There, a park ranger and a search party were waiting. I told them what I saw and where the man had fled. They organized a quick search. Hours later, the man was found, disoriented but alive, caught in a thicket. The ranger explained he had been lost for days, injured and scared. Without the search party, he might not have made it out. I felt a deep relief wash over me, knowing I had helped save a life, even in a small way. My ankle healed slowly over the next weeks, but I never forgot that day. The silence in the forest, the storm in the cabin, and the desperate man lost in the woods. I learned that nature is beautiful but unpredictable, and sometimes the scariest things are not ghosts or monsters, but real people struggling to survive. I had planned the hike for weeks. The trail I chose was a remote one, not well marked and rarely traveled. I wanted a challenge, a place where I could be completely alone with nature and push my limits. The weather was perfect for early fall, cool, crisp air, leaves starting to turn gold and red. I packed my backpack carefully the night before: water, extra food, a first aid kit, a compass, a map, a flashlight with spare batteries, and a sturdy knife. My hiking boots were well broken in, my jacket warm but lightweight. I felt ready. I started early in the morning, just after dawn, parking my car at the edge of the trailhead. The parking lot was empty except for one other car. I didn't see anyone else around. The trail led into dense woods, with tall pines and oaks towering overhead. The air smelled fresh, with hints of pine resin and damp earth. Birds chirped here and there, and a gentle breeze rustled the leaves. I walked at a steady pace, feeling the crunch of dry leaves and twigs beneath my boots. The first few miles went smoothly. The trail was narrow and winding, climbing steadily uphill. Occasionally, I stopped to catch my breath or to look out across the valley below, where patches of fog floated over the river and the distant hills. I took pictures with my phone, but mostly kept it in my pocket. I wanted to soak it all in, not just through a screen. Around midday, I reached a small clearing on a ridge. I sat down on a fallen log to rest and eat a sandwich. The sun was high now, filtering through the leaves and warming the ground. I could hear a faint rushing sound from somewhere below, a creek or small river, maybe. I drank water and checked my map. According to it, the trail ahead would drop steeply down to the water and then climb back up the other side. I packed up and continued. The path got rougher here. Rocks and roots jutted out, and the incline became steep. I gripped tree branches and rocks to steady myself. After about an hour, I heard the sound of water clearly, a strong, steady flow. The trail opened to a small wooden bridge crossing a creek. The wood looked old but solid. I stepped carefully across and continued on the opposite bank. The next part of the trail was less defined. The map showed a faint dotted line rather than a solid one, meaning it was more of a path worn by occasional hikers or animals. I followed it as best as I could, but soon it became harder to see. The forest thickened, with dense bushes and fallen branches blocking the way. I had to push through some undergrowth, and I scratched my arms a little. My heart beat faster, partly from exertion, partly because I was deep in the woods and truly alone now. I stopped to check the map and compass again. I thought I was still on course. The trail was supposed to lead me up to a ridge on the other side of the creek, where a campsite awaited. I wanted to reach it before nightfall. I had planned to spend the night and then hike back in the morning. But as I pressed on, I realized the path was not getting easier. In fact, it seemed to disappear entirely. I scanned the ground carefully. There were no trail markers, no footprints, nothing that looked like a path. I started to feel uneasy. The trees around me were tall and close together, and the sky was almost hidden by the canopy. I decided to stop and look around more thoroughly. I took out my phone and tried to get a GPS signal. No bars. I cursed silently. I hadn't expected to lose signal this far in. I pulled out my compass and map again. According to my compass, I was heading east, which was roughly the right direction. But the terrain was confusing. The map showed a bend in the creek nearby and the ridge beyond it. I considered turning back, but I had come too far. The light was still good, maybe 3 hours before sunset. I thought I could find the ridge and campsite before dark if I pushed on. So I put the map away, stowed the compass, and continued. The underbrush grew thicker. I had to duck under low branches and step over fallen logs. I was careful to watch my footing on the uneven ground. Suddenly, I slipped on loose stones near a steep drop-off. My heart jumped, and I grabbed a tree trunk to steady myself. The slope beside me dropped sharply down to the creek, which roared louder now, its water white and foamy. I took a deep breath and kept going, moving slowly and carefully along the edge. Then I heard a noise, a crack of a branch breaking nearby. I froze. My eyes darted around, trying to locate the source. The forest was mostly silent except for the creek and the occasional bird. The crack sounded again, closer this time. I stood very still, listening. Then I heard it, a low grunt or growl, something deep and guttural. My mind raced. Could it be a bear? I had read warnings about black bears in this area. I tried to remember the advice. Stay calm, don't run, make yourself look big. But I was alone and had no bear spray. I reached for my knife, holding it in front of me as best as I could. The noise came again, then footsteps crashing through bushes. I could see movement now, a large dark shape pushing through the trees about 30 yards away. It was big, heavy, and low to the ground. My heart pounded so loud I was sure it would give me away. The shape stopped, and for a moment, I thought it was just a large fallen log. Then it moved again. I decided to slowly back away, keeping my eyes on it. The shape didn't follow immediately but seemed to watch me. I tried not to make sudden movements, breathing deeply to steady myself. I moved a few steps back, then stopped. The shape let out a low growl and started moving toward me again. Panic surged through me. I turned and ran as fast as I could through the thick undergrowth, hearing the sound of heavy footsteps crashing after me. My legs burned, branches slapped my face and arms, and my boots slipped on loose earth. I barely looked back, just kept running downhill toward the creek. Suddenly, my foot caught a root, and I went flying forward, scraping my palms and knees on the dirt and rocks. I quickly got up, heart hammering, and plunged into the creek. The water was cold and fast, nearly pulling me under as I scrambled across the slippery stones. I made it to the opposite bank, panting and soaked. I pulled myself up the steep bank and looked back. The creature, a large black bear, was standing on the edge of the creek, watching me carefully. Its eyes glinted in the fading light. I stayed still, hoping it would lose interest. After what felt like forever, it turned and lumbered back into the woods. I waited another few minutes, then started walking slowly along the creek, trying to put distance between me and the bear. The sun was dipping low now, and the woods were growing darker fast. I knew I couldn't keep going in the dark. Not here. I looked for a safe spot to camp, a flat area away from the creek and with some visibility. I found a small clearing surrounded by thick bushes and started to set up my sleeping pad and bivy sack. I was shaking but forced myself to eat some food and drink water. I checked my knife and flashlight again. I tried to calm my breathing and control the fear rising inside me. Night in the woods was different. Sounds were sharper, shadows deeper. Every rustle made me jump. At some point, I drifted into a light sleep, but I woke suddenly to a noise. Twigs snapping nearby. My heart stopped. I grabbed the flashlight and shone it toward the sound, but I saw nothing. I listened. The noises stopped. I told myself it was probably a deer or a raccoon, but I couldn't relax. The night dragged on. I stayed alert, flashlight close and knife in hand. I thought about my options. In the morning, I would try to find the main trail again and head back. I knew I had to be more careful, not take any risks. When dawn finally came, the forest looked less scary in the soft morning light. I packed up quickly and started walking back the way I came, keeping my senses sharp. I stayed near the creek, hoping it would lead me back to the bridge and the more established trail. Hours passed. I moved carefully, avoiding slippery rocks and unstable ground. My legs were sore, and my backpack felt heavy. I kept checking the map and compass, trying to confirm my position. At times, the forest seemed endless. Trees in every direction, no clear path. Eventually, after a long morning of hiking, I heard the sound of a road and saw signs of a dirt parking area ahead. I broke into a run and finally reached the trailhead where I had started. Relief flooded through me. I sat on a bench, exhausted, wet, and dirty. My phone finally had a signal, and I called a friend to let them know I was safe. I thought about the bear, the near panic, the fear that almost overwhelmed me. The woods were beautiful, but they were wild and unforgiving. That day, I learned a lot about respect for nature and the importance of preparation. I knew I had been lucky. The forest was not a place for careless adventure. From then on, I planned my hikes differently, always telling someone my route, carrying bear spray, and turning back if the trail looked too dangerous or unclear. That hike stayed with me for a long time, a reminder that being alone in the wild can be humbling and scary, but it also gave me I remember the morning I set out on that hike clearly, even though it was months ago. The sun was barely up, just a faint light pushing away the dark sky. I had planned this trip for weeks, wanting to explore the deep forest trail that wound up a mountain ridge not far from town. It was supposed to be a day hike, just me, my backpack, some water and snacks. I told myself I needed a break from everything: work, noise, people, just the forest, the fresh air, and silence. The trailhead was quiet that morning. A small gravel parking lot with only one or two other cars, and a sign warning hikers to stay on the path and be careful of wildlife. I double-checked my gear, sturdy boots, extra socks, a map, compass, a whistle, and a fully charged phone. I was not new to hiking, but I was careful. The forest around me was dense with tall pines and firs, the air smelling crisp and earthy. I took a deep breath and started walking. First, the trail was easy. The dirt path was packed down from other hikers, lined with green bushes and wildflowers. Birds sang overhead, and every so often I caught a glimpse of squirrels or chipmunks darting through the underbrush. The sun rose higher, warming my face and lighting up the leaves with golden light. I felt calm and peaceful. The trail soon started climbing steeply. Rocks and roots made the path uneven. I slowed down, watching my step carefully. My breathing grew heavier as I ascended. The trees thinned out a little, revealing patches of sky and distant mountain peaks dusted with snow. I stopped at a small clearing to catch my breath and drink some water. I sat on a large rock, feeling the rough surface through my pants. I noticed then a faint smell, sharp and unpleasant, like something dead. I scanned the area but saw nothing. The forest was quiet again except for the wind in the branches. I stood up and moved on, telling myself it was probably an animal carcass hidden somewhere off the trail. As I climbed higher, the trail became narrower and rockier. I had to use my hands to steady myself on some sections. The forest changed. The trees were smaller and more spread out, the ground covered in moss and pine needles. I felt the temperature drop as I rose above the tree line. The air was thinner and colder, and the sky was now a bright blue with just a few wisps of clouds. At one point, I passed a small stream trickling down the mountain. The water was clear and icy cold. I knelt down and splashed some on my face, then refilled my water bottle. The sound of the stream was soothing. I paused there a long moment, watching the water ripple over stones and fallen leaves. After the stream, the trail turned along the side of the mountain. The drop was steep and deep, the valley below filled with thick forest. I stayed close to the inside edge, careful with each step. The path twisted and turned, sometimes barely wide enough for one person. Loose rocks crunched underfoot. I began to feel uneasy, though I didn't know why. It was still daylight, but the forest felt different here. Colder, darker, almost silent except for the wind. The trees were twisted and blackened in places, evidence of a past fire, perhaps. Charred trunks stood like skeletons. I looked at the map to check where I was. The trail should curve back into denser forest soon, but I didn't see the bend coming. Suddenly, a sharp noise broke the silence. It was a heavy thud followed by a rustle. I froze, heart pounding. Something was moving in the bushes nearby. My mind jumped to the worst. Bears, mountain lions, anything dangerous. I gripped my walking stick tightly and looked carefully. Nothing showed. I called out softly, my voice cracking, just to announce I was there. No answer. The silence returned, but now I was more alert. I told myself to stay calm, that animals usually avoid humans. I kept moving, faster this time, eyes scanning the brush on both sides. The path began to descend, the mountain less steep. The fire-damaged trees gave way to healthy ones again. I tried to focus on the sound of my boots and the wind. After maybe 20 minutes, I saw a fallen tree across the trail ahead. It looked recent, the bark fresh and bright. I stepped around it carefully. Then I noticed something strange. Tracks in the dirt, not animal prints. They were large, heavy, and irregular. I bent down to look closer. They looked like footprints, but too big for a person wearing boots. The shape was off, wider and longer. My stomach tightened. I thought about turning back, but I had already come so far. Besides, the sun was still up, maybe 3 hours before sunset. I decided to keep going, but stayed very alert. I passed a few more odd signs. Broken branches, patches of disturbed ground, like something large had passed through. The forest around me felt different now, as if something was watching. I tried to tell myself it was just my imagination. I found a narrow spot where the trail crossed a small ravine by a fallen log bridge. The wood looked old and shaky. I stepped onto it carefully, testing with my stick before putting weight down. The log creaked but held. Halfway across, I heard a crack behind me, like a heavy footfall. I whipped my head around. Nothing but shadows. My heart jumped and I clenched my jaw. I moved quickly off the log and onto solid ground. The forest felt thicker here, darker too, with dense undergrowth. I glanced at my watch. I had been hiking for about 5 hours. The trail was supposed to loop back and lead down to the parking lot soon. Suddenly, the path ended. Not just a bend or a clearing, but completely vanished into a tangle of bushes and fallen trees. I looked at the map and my GPS app. The trail should have continued, but I saw no clear route ahead. I stepped back and tried to find the path again. Nothing, only broken branches and rough ground. Panic started to build inside me. I had been careful, but now I was lost. I took a deep breath and tried to stay calm. I decided to retrace my steps back the way I had come. The forest seemed even more oppressive now. The sun was lower, casting long shadows. The wind picked up, making the branches rattle. I walked briskly, eyes scanning every movement. Then I heard it, a low growl coming from behind a tree not far away. I froze. The sound was deep and guttural, not a normal animal growl I recognized. I gripped my walking stick tightly. I started moving slowly, making noise to keep anything from sneaking up on me. The growling stopped. I kept going, heart racing. A few minutes later, I heard it again, closer this time. The sound was heavy footsteps crunching leaves and breaking twigs. Something was following me. I turned quickly but saw nothing. My breathing was fast, shallow. I decided to break into a run, heading back the way I had come. The forest was a blur, my feet stumbling on roots and rocks. The growling followed, echoing behind me. I could feel something big behind the trees, moving fast. I ran for maybe 10 minutes, not looking back. The path became clearer again. I reached the fallen log bridge and crossed quickly. When I got to the other side, the noises stopped. I stopped to catch my breath, hands on my knees. My legs were shaking. The sun was setting, casting an orange glow over the forest. I decided I had to get to the car fast before dark. The trail led downhill now, easier going. I walked quickly but carefully. The forest felt less threatening, though I still glanced around nervously. Then I saw something that made my blood run cold. A large, heavy branch had been propped up against a tree just off the trail. It looked like a crude barricade or a sign. I looked closer and saw marks on the bark, deep scratches and dark stains. I shivered and stepped back. Whoever had done this was close. I quickened my pace, trying to ignore the pounding in my chest. I finally reached the parking lot just as the last light faded. There were 2 cars there now, but no people. I hurried to my car, unlocked it, and got inside. I locked the doors and sat for a moment, heart still racing. I thought about calling for help, but my phone had no signal. I was alone, trapped in this remote place. Then I heard footsteps outside, slow and heavy. My hands trembled as I reached for the keys. The footsteps stopped at the edge of the clearing. I looked out the window but saw only shadows. I started the car, fumbling with the gear, and sped down the gravel road as fast as I could. Back on the main highway, I finally got a signal and called 911. I told them I was lost in the forest and felt like I was being followed. They said they would send help, but it might take some time. I drove to the nearest gas station and waited with the doors locked until the police arrived. They took my statement and searched the area the next day but found no sign of anyone. I never went back to that trail. I learned to trust my instincts, to respect the forest and the unknown things it hides. Sometimes, the scariest stories don't come from monsters or ghosts. They come from the very real dangers of being alone in the wild, where something or someone might be watching, waiting. I had planned this hike for weeks. The trail was supposed to be a moderate, 2-day trek through the Ridgeback Mountains, a place I'd never explored before but heard was beautiful and quiet. I was used to hiking alone, and I liked the silence, the way it forced me to focus. My pack was heavy, but I had everything I needed: food, water, a first aid kit, extra clothes, and a detailed map of the area. The weather was clear when I started early that morning. The sun was just rising, casting a soft orange glow on the pines. The first few hours went smoothly. The trail wound through thick forest, tall trees filtering the sunlight in a greenish haze. I heard birds singing, saw squirrels darting up trunks, and crossed small streams where the water ran cold and clear over smooth rocks. The path climbed steadily but not steeply, the dirt packed down by years of feet. My boots crunched on dry leaves and twigs, the sound comforting in the quiet. I stopped occasionally to drink water or eat a handful of trail mix. The air smelled fresh, mixed with pine needles and earth. The only sounds were the wind in the branches and my breathing. I liked this feeling, the slow rhythm of walking, the world reduced to footfalls and thoughts. Around midday, the forest thinned, and I reached a ridge overlooking a valley. The view was stunning. Endless hills rolling into the distance, dotted with patches of sunlight and shadow. I sat on a rock and took out my water bottle, letting the breeze cool my face. I checked my map and compass, confirming I was on track to reach the campsite by late afternoon. I packed up and continued. The trail grew rockier as I climbed higher. Loose stones crunched underfoot, and I moved more carefully. A few times, I paused to steady myself or check footing. My legs were tired but strong. Then, something shifted. The path, which had been clear and marked by red blazes on trees, started to fade. The markers were fewer and farther between. I slowed, looking carefully at the map. The trail was supposed to curve sharply left at a fork, but I had passed it without noticing. I turned back, scanning for the sign. I found it, a barely visible trail splitting off between two thick bushes. I took the left path and pressed on. The forest here was denser, the sunlight dimmer. The air felt cooler, damper. The ground was soft with moss and fallen needles. I noticed the silence had deepened. No birds, no rustling, just my footsteps. After about an hour, the path seemed to disappear altogether. There was no clear trail, only broken branches and flattened grass. I stopped and took out my map again. I realized I had missed a turn, or maybe the trail had been washed out in a recent storm. The map showed the ridge continuing, but I was unsure which direction to take. I felt a flicker of unease. I wasn't lost, not yet, but I was off course. I tried to stay calm, reminding myself that I had a compass and a GPS app on my phone. Though the signal was weak here, I checked my location. It showed me somewhere near the middle of the ridge, but not close to the campsite. I decided to follow the ridge line, hoping it would lead me back to the trail or to a recognizable landmark. I climbed over rocks and stepped around fallen trees, moving carefully. My legs burned, but I pushed on. The sun was starting to dip behind the mountains when I reached a small clearing. I looked around, but there was no sign of a trail or any markers. The valley stretched out below, darker now, and the sky was fading to pink and purple. I pulled out my flashlight and put on my jacket. The temperature was dropping quickly. I knew I couldn't keep going in the dark without a clear path. I decided to set up a camp here for the night. I found a flat spot, gathered some dry wood, and managed to light a small fire. The flames crackled and warmed my hands. I ate a bit of jerky and drank water. My heart was beating faster than normal, the reality of being off the trail settling in. I lay back against a rock, staring up at the stars emerging through the thinning clouds. I thought about my plan for the morning, to follow the ridge downhill and try to find the main trail or a road. Sleep was hard to come by. Every sound in the dark, the snap of a twig, the rustle of leaves, made me tense. I listened for animals, but all I heard was the wind. When dawn came, pale and cold, I packed up quickly. The fire was just embers now. I strapped on my pack and started moving downhill along the ridge. I followed the compass carefully, matching the map. The ground was slippery with dew, and I had to watch my footing. As the day wore on, I found more signs of a trail, broken branches, footprints, a flattened path. My relief was immediate but cautious. I moved faster now, eager to reach safety but careful not to rush. By late afternoon, I reached a dirt road cutting through the trees. I followed it downhill, hoping it would lead to a highway or a ranger station. After a couple of miles, I saw a parked car and a group of hikers loading up gear. I called out and they helped me call for rescue. They gave me food and water and wrapped me in a warm blanket. I was exhausted but safe. In the end, I learned that even with all the preparation, nature can be unpredictable. I had gotten lost because I missed a turn, but I stayed calm, used my tools, and made smart choices. The fear was real, but so was my determination to get out. I've always liked hiking alone. The quiet, the smell of pine trees, the feeling of being small in the middle of the wilderness. It was peaceful. Nothing complicated, just me and the trail. That day started like any other. I woke early, packed my bag carefully with water, snacks, a first aid kit, my map, and a compass. I wore sturdy boots, a waterproof jacket, and carried my trusted trekking pole. I checked the weather. Clear skies, cool temperature, perfect for a long day hike. My plan was to take a lesser-known trail in the national forest I'd been to a few times before, a loop that would take me about 8 hours to complete. I'd been on parts of it before, but not the whole loop. I liked exploring new paths. I told myself I was ready, experienced enough for this solo trip. The trailhead was quiet when I arrived. No cars, no other hikers, just the sound of birds and a gentle breeze through the trees. I stepped onto the dirt path, feeling the soft earth under my boots. The forest was dense, tall trees reaching up like pillars. The sun filtered through the branches, casting dappled light on the ground. The smell of pine and fresh earth filled my nose. The first couple of hours were easy. The trail was well marked, with painted blazes on the trees guiding me. The terrain was gentle, a mix of flat ground and small rises. I stopped a few times to drink water and eat some trail mix. I took pictures of wildflowers and a squirrel that darted across the path. It was the kind of day where everything seemed normal and calm. After about 3 hours, the trail started to get tougher. The path narrowed and climbed steeply up a ridge. I had to use my hands to steady myself on the rocks in a few places. The sun climbed higher, and I felt the sweat soak through my shirt. I stopped at a small clearing near the ridge's peak. From there, I could see the valley below, the river winding through it like a silver ribbon. The view was breathtaking. I sat on a rock and rested for a while, drinking water and catching my breath. After the break, I pressed on. The trail dropped down into a thick forest again. This part was less traveled. The blazes were faint, and some parts of the path were overgrown with bushes and fallen branches. I had to push aside low-hanging branches and step carefully around roots and rocks. The forest was quiet, except for the occasional bird call and the sound of my boots crunching leaves. As I walked, I kept glancing at my map and compass. The trail on the map looked simple enough, but in reality, it twisted and turned unexpectedly. I realized I was losing time, moving slower than I thought. The sun was starting to drop toward the west, making long shadows between the trees. Around this time, I began to notice something strange. The forest felt different. The air was heavier, and the usual sounds seemed muffled. No birds, no rustling animals, just the sound of the wind moving through the trees and my own breathing. I stopped to look around more carefully. The trees were tall but close together, their branches creating a thick canopy that blocked much of the fading sunlight. I checked my map again. According to it, I should have reached a small creek by now, a place I planned to refill my water bottle. But there was no creek in sight, only trees and underbrush stretching in every direction. I kept walking, hoping the path would open up soon. The trail was hard to see now. Muddy patches and scattered leaves covered it in places. I strained my eyes to find the faint blazes but found only a few half-faded marks. After a while, I realized I must have missed a turn. I stopped, pulled out my compass, and tried to get my bearings. The compass needle pointed north, but the trail should have been heading northeast by now. I moved slowly, trying to find the right direction. Every time I thought I was back on track, the trail disappeared again under thick bushes or fallen trees. The sun was low now, a deep orange glow slipping through the trees. I knew I had to find a safe place to stop and rest. I didn't want to keep wandering in the dark. I looked for a flat clearing where I could set up my emergency bivy bag, something I always carried for unexpected nights outside. Then I heard it, a sharp crack, like a branch breaking nearby. My heart jumped. I froze, listening. The forest was silent again, except for that distant crack. I thought maybe it was a deer or a squirrel, but the sound came again, this time closer, heavier. Something was moving nearby. I gripped my trekking pole tighter and slowly turned around. The trees were thick, and it was hard to see far. I couldn't spot anything clearly. My mind raced. Was it a bear? A wild animal? Or worse, another person? I told myself to stay calm. I made noise by banging my pole on a tree trunk, hoping to scare off whatever it was. No answer.
No rustling.
Just silence. I moved quickly but quietly, trying to find the creek and get back to the main trail. My legs were getting tired, and the fading light made it harder to see the path. Then I tripped on a root and fell hard. My knee hurt, but I kept going, gritting my teeth against the pain. I finally heard the sound of running water ahead. Thankfully, the creek. I bent down and refilled my bottle, then took a moment to rest. The creek was small but clear, and I felt better after drinking. I looked at my map and compass again. I needed to follow the creek downstream to get back to the main trail. I hoped it would lead me out before dark, but the forest had other plans. As I followed the creek, the path became muddy and slippery. I slipped once and almost fell into the water. The trees closed in tighter. Then, I heard footsteps behind me. Not animal footsteps, heavier, deliberate steps. I stopped, heart pounding, and waited. Nothing. I kept moving faster now. I could feel someone following me. I didn't look back. I didn't want to see whoever it was. My mind raced with every possible scenario. I remembered reading stories about hikers who got lost or met dangerous people in the woods. I had never thought it would happen to me. The sun was nearly gone now, the last light slipping away. The forest darkened quickly. I took out my headlamp and turned it on. The narrow beam cut through the shadows, lighting the path ahead. I hurried along the creek bank, trying to stay calm and keep my footing. Then I heard a voice. Not words, just a low sound, like a grunt or a growl. It came from behind a cluster of bushes. I stopped dead, froze in place. The footsteps stopped too. The silence after that sound was worse than anything. I was alone but not alone. I thought about running, but my knee hurt too much, and the ground was uneven. I slowly moved forward, shining my light into the bushes. Nothing moved. Nothing appeared. Still, I felt eyes watching me. I decided to keep following the creek, hoping it would lead to the trail or a road. The creek curved sharply, and the forest opened slightly. Ahead, I saw what looked like a dirt path, maybe the main trail. I ran toward it, slipping on the wet leaves and mud. When I reached the path, I felt relief wash over me. I could hear distant sounds, maybe cars, maybe a nearby campground. I moved faster, following the trail markings. After a few minutes, I saw lights through the trees. A ranger station or a campsite. I stepped out of the forest and onto a gravel road. A couple of people sat by a fire, and I waved my hands to get their attention. They helped me, gave me water and a phone to call for help. My knee was bruised and sore, but I was safe. They told me they'd been looking for me after someone reported my planned hike and my expected return time. The experience left me shaken. I realized how easy it was to get lost and how vulnerable I had been. The footsteps, the voice, the feeling of being followed. It wasn't ghosts or stories. It was real danger. People, animals, the forest itself could all be threats. From then on, I never took a single hike alone without telling someone exactly where I was going and when I'd be back. I carry extra gear, a GPS, and more food. I learned to respect the forest more. Not just for its beauty, but for its power to overwhelm and surprise. The forest doesn't forgive mistakes easily. It demands respect and careful planning. I survived because of preparation, luck, and a little stubbornness. But I know next time might not be so easy. I started the hike like I had so many times before. I wasn't new to this. In fact, I had been hiking solo for years, often heading out into the deeper parts of the woods that most weekend adventurers avoided. I liked the silence, the calmness of being away from cities and people, the feeling of being completely alone with the wind and trees and dirt under my boots. It helped me think and sometimes helped me not think at all. That day started like the others, early in the morning, just as the sun broke the edge of the mountains. The plan was to hike up into the High Ridge Loop in northern Colorado. It was supposed to be about 14 miles, something I could knock out in a day if I kept a steady pace and didn't waste time. I had prepped the night before, packed my usual gear: map, compass, water, food, emergency whistle, space blanket, first aid kit, and even a small tarp in case of sudden weather. I checked the forecast 3 times. Sunny, low wind, no sign of storms. I'd also let my brother know where I was going and when I expected to be back. I'd done everything by the book. The first few miles were perfect. The trail was dry, the air cool, and everything smelled like pine and dirt. I stopped once to take in the view from a rock ledge that looked out over a small valley. I took a sip of water, ate a protein bar, then got going again. I passed a couple of other hikers going the opposite direction, but after that, I was completely alone. That's how I liked it, Somewhere around mile 6 or 7, I saw something strange. There was a side trail that branched off to the right. I had studied the map carefully the night before and again that morning. That trail wasn't marked. It was narrow but clearly visible. It looked used. Not heavily, but enough that you could tell people had gone that way. I stood there for a minute, checking my compass and map again. Nothing. There was no record of that path, at least not on any recent maps. I should have kept walking, but curiosity won. I'd always liked finding little forgotten places, old logging roads, mining remnants, stuff like that. Sometimes they led to nothing. Sometimes you found old cabins or rusted out trucks from 50 years ago. I figured I'd follow it for a few minutes, just to see where it led. Worst case, I'd turn around and come back to the main loop. I walked maybe half a mile before things started to feel off. The trail narrowed more, winding through thick trees that blocked out a lot of light. Everything got quieter. Not in the peaceful nature silence way. I mean really quiet. No wind, no birds, no bugs, nothing. Just my boots crunching the dirt and the faint sound of my own breathing. It was subtle at first. The path started to twist in strange ways, sharp angles that didn't feel natural. Then the trees grew denser. They weren't even the same kind of trees I'd seen earlier. These were older, thicker, with bark that looked black and rough like burnt wood. I didn't recognize the species. There was moss everywhere, even on the ground, and it made everything feel damp, like it had just rained even though I hadn't seen a drop. I stopped and turned around. The trail was still behind me, but it looked narrower than before. I told myself I'd follow it a bit more, maybe just a few minutes. Then I'd turn back. About 20 minutes later, I realized I hadn't seen the sun for a while. I checked my watch. It was nearly noon, but it looked more like late afternoon. The light was dim, filtered through the thick canopy above me. I was starting to sweat, not from heat but from unease. I reached for my map again. Still nothing. I was off-grid. I made the decision to turn back. I walked briskly, retracing my steps, or at least I thought I was. After maybe 30 minutes of walking back, I reached a small clearing I hadn't seen before. It had a pile of rocks in the center, stacked about 3 feet high, maybe 2 feet across. Something about it didn't sit right with me. It looked too deliberate, not natural, like someone had built it as a marker or maybe a warning. I circled it, looking for anything familiar. Trees, moss, damp ground, but no sign of the trail I had come from. I tried not to panic. I told myself I'd just veered off a little. I took out my compass and began walking east, back the way I had entered the forest. But the deeper I went, the more twisted everything became. Trees grew in strange patterns. Some bent in arches that looked like they were shaped by hands. Others leaned over the path, their limbs stretching like arms. I knew I was imagining things, letting fear get to me, but I couldn't help it. Something was wrong. The light faded faster than it should have. By the time I realized the sun was setting, I had no idea where I was. My legs were starting to ache. My water was half gone. I hadn't eaten in hours. I knew I had to find a spot to set up a temporary camp, wait for daylight, and try again in the morning. I found a spot under a thick tree with a patch of dry leaves. I laid out the tarp and sat down. I didn't even want to eat. I just sat there, gripping my knees and listening to the silence. Then came the sound. It was faint at first, a rustling, not wind, not an animal. It was too rhythmic, almost like breathing, slow, heavy, not close but not far either. I froze. Every hair on my arms stood straight. I didn't move for what felt like an hour. Eventually, the sound stopped. I didn't sleep. I didn't even close my eyes. I waited for the light to change. When the morning came, everything looked different. Not better, different. The moss was dry. The trees looked less dense. I couldn't tell if it was the light or my mind playing tricks. I packed my tarp and started walking. This time I chose a direction and stuck to it. I kept the sun at my left and walked for hours. No trail, no signs, just forest. At some point I stumbled across a rotted fence post. Just one, sticking out of the ground, covered in moss and rot. Then a second and a third. I realized I was walking through what had once been a property line. maybe an old homestead. I followed the posts and eventually came to a structure. A cabin, more like the ruins of one. The roof had collapsed, walls leaning in, windows broken out. It looked like it had been abandoned for decades. I didn't want to go near it, but I had no choice. I needed shelter or at least something familiar. I searched around the area. There were rusted cans in the dirt, some broken glass, the remains of an old axe head. Whoever had lived here had left in a hurry or died here. Behind the cabin was a small hill. I climbed it, hoping to get a better view of the area. From the top, I could see the tree line thinning in the far distance. A break in the forest. Could have been a field, a road, something man-made. It was my first real hope in over 24 hours. I hiked toward it, moving fast despite the fatigue. My legs were shaking, but I pushed forward. I reached the clearing just before dark. It was a field, dry, yellowed grass, and beyond that, what looked like an old road. Dirt, but with clear tire tracks. I followed it for maybe another mile until I saw a gate. A rusted metal gate with a sign hanging from it. The sign was too faded to read, but it didn't matter. Beyond the gate was a gravel road. It took another 4 hours of walking before I saw a pickup truck parked near a trailhead sign. No one was in it. I waited, crouched near the trees, unsure if it was safe. Eventually, a man in his 60s appeared from down the path with a dog at his side. I didn't say anything. I just stepped out, and he froze when he saw me. He gave me a ride back to the nearest ranger station. I was dehydrated, bruised, and exhausted. When I told the rangers what had happened, they seemed confused. They pulled out their maps, but there was no record of any trail where I described it. No ruins, no cabin, nothing, just forest. They sent a search team out later that week. I got a call afterward. They didn't find anything. Not the pile of rocks, not the trail, not the cabin. Nothing. I stopped hiking alone after that. I stayed off the backcountry trails. I even moved to a smaller town away from the mountains. I couldn't shake the feeling that I had found something I wasn't supposed to find. Not supernatural, just forgotten, hidden, maybe for a reason. Maybe it was a piece of land that had seen something bad happen on it a long time ago. Maybe it was government land that had been wiped off the maps. I don't know. I never will. But I do know this. I trusted my experience, my gear, my instincts, and none of it mattered. I got lucky. I found my way out. But every night since then, I hear that sound in my head, the rustling, the breathing, the silence that isn't empty. I never figured out what that trail was or who had walked it before me, and I never want to find out again. I'd been hiking for years, but this trip was supposed to be different. I had saved up a few vacation days, and I wanted to finally check off a solo hike in Colorado's backcountry. I'd done solo hikes before, but never one this far off the beaten path. I wanted to go somewhere quiet, where there wouldn't be many other hikers, so I picked a trail in the San Juan Mountains that I'd found online. It didn't show up on most mainstream hiking guides, just a few mentions on old forums and a few shaky GPS screenshots. That was what made it perfect. I wanted peace, nature, and a bit of challenge. That's all I was looking for. I packed for 4 days. My gear was solid: tent, food, water filter, sleeping bag, stove, bear spray, small hatchet, GPS, and a printed map. I double-checked everything twice. I left early in the morning, drove through winding roads, and got to the forest access road by early afternoon. It was narrow, barely a road anymore, and it beat up my old truck a bit, but I managed to get to a flat spot near the start of the route. I parked, locked up the truck, strapped my pack on, and started walking. I didn't see a single soul. The air smelled like pine and dirt, and everything was quiet except for birds and the occasional gust of wind. The trail wasn't well maintained, just a narrow path through thick trees. It felt remote in a way I had hoped it would. I followed the tree markers and kept my GPS on to track where I was. The first few miles were uneventful, uphill and slow, with soft forest floor under my boots. I kept an eye out for animals, but the only ones I saw were squirrels, a couple deer, and a lone fox far off. As evening came, I stopped near a small clearing beside a stream. I set up my tent, filtered some water, cooked a simple meal, and went to bed early. The night was cold but quiet, and I slept better than I expected. Day 2 started early. I broke camp and started heading further into the woods. The path narrowed more, becoming just a worn line in the leaves. Around noon, the trees thinned out, and I reached a ridge. From there, I could see miles of green forests and blue ridges stretching out. It felt like I was the only person for miles. That's when I noticed something odd on the opposite ridge. Through my binoculars, I could barely make it out, but it looked like a cabin or some kind of man-made structure, half hidden by trees. There were no roads nearby, and it wasn't marked on the map. It sat in a patch of cleared trees, maybe a few hundred feet off the trail, but it was too far to tell for sure. It seemed strange, the way it was tucked in. I kept walking, trying to shake off the curiosity, but the shape of it stuck with me. I knew most cabins that deep in the woods were either hunting cabins or old homesteads, but this one looked different. The roof was flat and metal, not sloped like older cabins. It had a straight shape, almost like a shipping container or prefab structure. Too clean, too new. I tried to forget about it. I pushed through more brush, climbing higher and deeper. I didn't plan to go near the structure, but my planned trail cut close to the ridge where it sat. About an hour later, I started to hear something weird. It sounded like a low hum, faint but steady. I thought it might be wind, but it wasn't coming from the trees. It was coming from somewhere specific, almost like machinery. I stopped and listened again. The humming was low and constant, not like anything in nature. It sent a strange chill down my back. I checked my GPS and map. The trail was supposed to keep bending north, but the markers were gone. Nothing but trees and rocks. It was getting late, and I was tired, but I felt drawn to figure out what was making the sound. Maybe it was just an old generator or something. Curiosity got the better of me. I pushed off the trail and started bushwhacking slowly through the trees, using the general direction I saw earlier. The hum got louder, not by much, but it was definitely real. I kept walking carefully, watching for trip hazards, when I started seeing unnatural things. The trees around me had been cut. Not all, but enough that it was clear someone had been working out here. Clean cuts, old stumps, no recent growth. Then I saw tire tracks, not fresh, but visible. No way they brought a vehicle in through the trail I used. They must have come in from the other side of the ridge, maybe from a private road not marked on the map. That's when I saw the fence. It was low, about 4 feet tall, made of heavy wire mesh, and surrounded a small area in a rough square. There was no gate, just a rusted metal pole on each corner and barbed wire across the top. Inside the fence was a small building. I could see it clearly now. It was about the size of a trailer with metal sides and a flat roof. No windows, one heavy-looking door, no markings, just blank walls and the steady hum coming from somewhere inside. I crouched and watched for a long time. No movement, no smoke, no lights, just the hum. Something about it felt off. Not abandoned, but not really active either. Like it was meant to be unnoticed. I considered turning around. I should have, but I wanted to understand what this was. Maybe it was some kind of research outpost, but it didn't look like it. I circled it slowly from the woods, staying out of sight. On the far side, I saw a thick cable running from the structure down into the ground, disappearing into a shallow trench. That didn't make sense. No solar panels, no generator, just that cable. I backed away slowly, heading back toward the trail. I didn't want to be near that thing anymore. I moved fast, heart racing, and made camp far from the structure. I didn't light a fire. I just set up my tent behind some rocks and trees and tried to sleep. But the whole night I kept thinking about that building, about the cable, and that weird humming noise. On day 3, I planned to keep moving north and loop back toward my truck by the end of the next day. I got up early, skipped breakfast, and started hiking hard. But after an hour or so, I started seeing strange signs again. Boot prints, not mine. Deep, heavy treads in the dirt like someone had come through with a lot of gear. They weren't fresh, maybe a few days old, but they weren't worn away completely. I followed them briefly and saw they led away from the direction I came, deeper into the trees. I turned away, but something about this whole trip felt wrong now. I wanted to get out faster than planned. I decided to cut through a shallow valley and take a steeper shortcut back toward my starting point. I would miss one night of camping, but it was worth it. I started descending into the valley, but halfway down I spotted something that made me freeze. A small pile of torn fabric and plastic. At first I thought it was just garbage, an old tent maybe, but as I got closer, I saw it was a backpack. It had been torn open. The straps were cut, not broken. The frame was snapped in half. Scattered around it were energy bar wrappers, a cracked water bottle, and a smashed phone. No ID, no name tag, but this hadn't been there long. Maybe a week, tops. I stood still, scanning the area. Nothing but trees and wind. I didn't like this at all. I took photos of everything, then backed away and kept moving. I didn't even stop for food. I drank from my bottle while walking and just kept going. Around midday, I reached a narrow gap in the ridge. I was pushing through some thick brush when I saw movement up ahead. Not an animal, person. I ducked behind a rock. They were far off, maybe 200 feet away, walking slowly along the same ridge. Dressed in dark clothes, wearing a pack. But the way they moved, something was off. They weren't hiking. They were looking for something. I stayed still and watched. They stopped suddenly and crouched, looking at something on the ground. Then they stood up and turned slowly, and I saw a glimpse of something shiny in their hand. Not a hiking pole, not a flashlight. It looked like a weapon. I backed away carefully, keeping low, and moved around the other side of the ridge. I didn't want to be seen. From that point on, I was moving fast. I didn't stop. I climbed, slid, scrambled, whatever it took. I didn't feel safe. I didn't want to camp again. I pushed for hours, until my legs were shaking and my shirt was soaked through. I finally reached a familiar point on the trail where I had passed the first day. From there, I knew I was about 4 miles from the truck. I kept going. The last mile felt endless. I kept checking behind me, listening for footsteps, expecting someone to appear out of the trees. But no one did. When I finally saw the glint of my truck through the trees, I almost broke into a run. I got inside, locked the doors, and sat there for a few minutes, catching my breath. I drove down the dirt road, barely slowing for the bumps. I didn't relax until I reached pavement. When I got to town, I stopped at the gas station, went inside, and asked the clerk if there were any research stations or cabins in the mountains near the ridge. He just shook his head and said there were a few hunting cabins, but they were all much farther south. I didn't report it, not at first, but a few days later, I sent an email to the Forest Service, including the GPS location, the photos of the torn path. I had planned the hike for weeks, not because it was special or anything, but because I needed to be alone for a while. Life back home felt heavy. I wasn't running from anything dramatic, just too much noise, too many people, and not enough quiet. So I picked a place I'd never been before, somewhere deeper than usual, a trail that didn't show up on the popular sites or get many visitors. It was called Hollow Ridge, somewhere in the middle of dense woods 2 hours north of the nearest town, with miles of unpaved roads just to get to the trailhead. No cell service, no reception, no distractions. That's exactly what I wanted. I packed light but made sure I had all the essentials: tent, food, water, knife, compass, topo maps, and a weatherproof backpack. I kept everything in good shape. I was used to hiking alone. This wasn't the first time. It wouldn't be the last either, or so I thought. The plan was a 4-day solo hike. I'd follow the trail east along the ridge, then loop down into a valley where an old fire tower was supposed to stand. I marked my route on a printed map, circled water sources, and noted potential camp spots. It was remote but not uncharted, just old, forgotten. Most people chose easier trails with better views. I didn't need views. I needed space. I started just after sunrise. The trailhead was nothing more than a break in the trees with a hand-painted wooden sign nailed to a post. Faded letters barely legible. The forest swallowed sound. Even the wind felt muffled. It was cooler than I expected, with heavy morning fog. I pulled my jacket tighter and started walking. The path climbed slowly at first, the ground packed with leaves and old roots. I kept a steady pace, stopping only to sip water and check my bearings. By noon, I had climbed higher than expected. The trail was more rugged than the map showed, steep, narrow, and washed out in places. It looked like no one had hiked it in a long time, but I was in shape. I moved through it well, boots finding traction on rock and soil, hands steady when I needed them. By the time I made camp the first night, I had covered over 10 miles. I picked a spot near a small creek, just off the main trail. The ground was soft but dry. I pitched my tent, boiled water for a meal, and sat in silence as night came. I remember the quiet most. Not even the buzz of insects, just wind in the trees. No planes overhead, no far-off cars. It was the kind of silence that made you feel like the only person left on Earth. I slept well, woke early, ate quickly. Day 2 would take me deeper into the ridge, past the halfway point. I wanted to make it to the fire tower by nightfall. The second day felt different. About 6 miles in, I saw the first odd thing. A set of boot prints that didn't match mine. Larger, wider, older maybe, but not by much. At first, I thought nothing of it. It's public land. Anyone could have been there. But as I followed the trail, I noticed the prints came and went. Sometimes they followed the trail, sometimes they veered off. Once, I saw where they led behind a thick wall of brush, then reappeared back on the trail like someone had stepped off and come back. Still, I kept going. The sky was overcast now, and the woods were darker. I didn't see any animals, not even birds. I passed broken branches that looked fresh, not from wind. And then I found something else. A sock. It was damp, crumpled, lying beside a tree off the trail. Adult-sized, gray, dirty. Not torn, not buried. Just there. It made no sense. I picked it up, looked around, then dropped it. Something about it made my stomach turn. Not because it was gross, but because it didn't fit. Who loses a sock in the middle of the woods? Who walks barefoot out here? That night, I camped by a small ridge. There were no clearings, so I had to settle for a flat stretch of trail. I didn't eat much. I kept looking behind me, waiting for a sound that never came. I went to bed early but didn't sleep. I kept hearing things. Not footsteps, nothing that clear, but breaks in rhythm. A snapped twig, a swish in the leaves. I told myself it was wind. I told myself it was squirrels, raccoons, maybe deer, but I never saw anything. When morning came, I felt groggy, stiff, and tense. I thought about turning back. I was more than halfway in, but something didn't feel right. I studied the map. If I stayed on course, I could reach the fire tower by midday, then loop down into the valley, make my way back to the car in another day or two. So I kept going. It got harder. The trail was barely visible now. I had to rely on landmarks, rock formations, a bent tree, a dry creek bed. My compass helped, but I started second-guessing everything. I crossed an area that looked burned out, maybe from a fire years ago. Blackened stumps, no undergrowth, ash in the dirt. The wind picked up, and I swore I heard something whistle through the trees, like breath, long and low. Then I found the remains of a camp. Not old, days old at most. A burned-out fire ring, blackened stones, a crumpled sleeping pad, an empty backpack torn open and tossed near a log. There was no sign of a tent, no food, no clothes. I walked slowly around it, taking it in. The fire hadn't been out for long. There were bits of charred wood still clinging to their shape. And boot prints again, fresh ones. Heavier now, deeper, like someone had been pacing. I left fast. By afternoon, I found the fire tower. It stood crooked on a rise, the structure weathered and leaning. Stairs missing, windows shattered. I climbed partway up but stopped when the whole thing creaked under my weight. From the platform, I saw nothing but trees. No smoke, no buildings, no people, just forest in every direction. Then I noticed something. On the far slope, maybe 100 yards away, there was movement. A figure, too far to make out clearly. Just a person standing still, facing me, not walking, not waving, just still. I blinked and they were gone. I scrambled down, nearly twisting my ankle, and made my way off the ridge. I didn't care about the loop. I didn't care about the map. I wanted out. I pushed hard, hiking fast, checking my compass every 10 minutes. I moved until dark, then kept moving. I used my headlamp, but the battery was low. The light flickered as I walked. At some point, I tripped over a root and tore my pant leg, slicing my shin open. Blood ran into my sock. I didn't stop. When I finally did, it was because I couldn't walk anymore. I found a rock wall and sat with my back to it, knife in hand. I didn't pitch my tent. I didn't eat. I just sat and waited for morning. I must have fallen asleep at some point because I woke to light. It was foggy again, thick as milk. I stood slowly, legs stiff and sore, and started walking. I checked the map. If I kept moving west, I'd hit a service road. From there, I could hike down to the gravel road that led to my car. But nothing looked right. The trees were too dense. The slope was off. The compass spun for a moment, then steadied, then spun again. I shook it, checked it again. Still wrong. I kept walking anyway. I was breathing harder than normal, panic crawling up my throat. Around noon, I found another sock. Same size, same kind, just lying on the ground, soaked with dew. This one was black. I didn't touch it. Then I heard it. Footsteps. Behind me. Not close. Not fast. Just steady. I turned and saw no one. I walked faster. So did they. I stopped. Silence. I waited. Minutes passed. Then crunching leaves. Not animals. Not wind. I started running. I don't know how long I ran, but I stopped only when I hit water. A creek I hadn't seen before. I followed it downhill, figuring water would lead me out. My leg throbbed. I felt dizzy. I kept seeing movement behind trees, just out of focus. A shape ducking low. A shadow leaning. Then I saw the car. My car. It was parked under the trees, covered in dust, exactly where I left it. Somehow I had looped all the way back. I didn't think. I ran to it, threw my gear in the back, and drove without checking anything. I made it to a gas station an hour later. I didn't talk to anyone, just cleaned my leg in the bathroom and bought a sandwich. I slept in a motel that night, locked the door, kept the lights on. I reported what I saw to the rangers the next day. They took my statement, asked questions, wrote things down. They said people sometimes leave gear behind. They said fire towers can attract squatters. They said nothing about the footprints, nothing about the figure. I never went back. A few months later, I looked up Hollow Ridge again. Found a blog post from someone who hiked there 5 years ago. Said they felt watched. Said they found a tent with no one inside. Said they left early too. There were no official records of missing hikers. But I know what I saw. I know what I heard. I decided to go hiking alone because everything in my life felt like it was falling apart. Work was eating me alive. My sleep had turned into a mess of waking up at 2 a.m. and lying there wide awake until the sun came up, and I hadn't really spoken to anyone in weeks. I thought maybe I needed space, air, trees, just to walk until I was too tired to think. I picked a trail I'd never done before. It was upstate, about 3 hours from home. The weather forecast said it would be dry for the next few days, mid-60s during the day, 40s at night. I packed a backpack with a good amount of food, a sleeping bag, a headlamp, an extra battery pack, a knife, and a little camping stove. I left early in the morning, parked at the trailhead lot, and signed the sheet in the little weatherproof box that tells the rangers someone's out there. The plan was to do a 22-mile loop over 2 nights. It wasn't too remote, but it wasn't popular either. A few online reviews said the trail could get confusing in places. That should have made me pause, but I just wanted out. Out of my apartment, out of the city, out of my head. The first day was actually nice. The trail climbed up through thick pine and then cut through a long open stretch of rock ledges. From there, you could see hills rolling off for miles in every direction. Felt good in a basic way. My legs hurt from the climb, my lungs burned, and my heart felt like it was waking up after weeks of being stuck in low gear. By late afternoon, I had reached a flat spot next to a shallow creek and decided to set up camp there. It was quiet, too quiet in a way. No birds, no bugs, just the wind moving through the trees. I ate something simple, some tuna and crackers, and tried to sleep early. But I didn't fall asleep for hours. There's a different kind of silence in the woods at night. It's not peaceful. It's alert. Everything feels sharper. Every tiny rustle sounds like a bear. I kept waking up thinking I'd heard something, but every time I sat up and listened, there was nothing. The next morning I was groggy and stiff, but I got moving early. The trail curved eastward, descending into a valley with thick underbrush and old, fallen trees. I had to duck and climb over more and more logs. I was using a paper map, no GPS. My phone had no service at all. It was still on airplane mode to save battery. A few hours in, I realized something was off. The trail markers became more and more spaced out. Then they stopped altogether. The path in front of me looked like it had been used, but only barely. I figured I'd missed a turn somewhere. I stopped, took off my pack, and pulled out the map. That's when I noticed something that made my stomach twist. My boots, wet from the morning dew and slippery with mud, had tracked weird lines across the last section of rock I'd climbed over. But there were other tracks too, not animal ones, hiking boots, fresh, leading off to the right, away from where I'd come from. I hadn't seen a single person all day, not one voice, not one distant hiker, not one sign anyone else was out there. I stared at the boot prints for a long time. They looked older than mine by maybe an hour or two. The mud in them was dry, flaked at the edges. I wasn't sure why it made me nervous, but it did. It felt like something wasn't right, like the presence of those tracks made the forest colder somehow. I picked up my pack and kept moving, trying to reconnect with the trail. After maybe 30 minutes, I came to a small clearing with a fire ring made of stones. It looked old, but not ancient. There were black scorch marks on the rocks, and some half-burnt sticks piled in the middle. A torn glove lay beside it. One glove. I didn't like that. Something about one glove on the ground in the middle of nowhere just didn't feel right. I took a few pictures of it with my phone and then turned around to leave. But something stopped me. The boot prints. They were back, leading into the clearing. And not mine. I followed them with my eyes. They went around the fire ring once, then toward a tree at the edge of the clearing, then stopped. Just stopped. No return prints. No drag marks. No sign someone had sat or stood there. It didn't make sense. I turned in circles for a while, trying to figure out where they went. I checked all directions but didn't see anything. It was like the person had just vanished into thin air. At this point, I had that heavy pressure in my chest that comes with real fear. I told myself I needed to keep moving, get back on the loop, and finish the hike. I told myself people get turned around all the time and that I just needed to be smart. But I couldn't find the trail. I couldn't find any trail. I walked for hours. The sun started dipping lower, casting long shadows across the trees. I hadn't seen a marker in miles. My water was running low, and I hadn't eaten much. Then I heard something that froze me in place. It was the sound of movement, not wildlife. Footsteps, human, steady, slow, and close. I dropped to a crouch and listened. The steps stopped when I did. I waited, holding my breath. Nothing. I started moving again, but more carefully. The trees were too dense to see far in any direction. Then I saw something that made my throat tighten. A piece of blue nylon tent material hung from a tree branch. It looked shredded. I moved toward it slowly. Under the branch was a campsite, or what used to be one. There was a collapsed tent, ripped along the side. A cooking pot lay nearby, rusted and dented. A broken plastic container. And behind the tent, a backpack, the top still zipped. I knew I shouldn't touch anything. I knew I should just leave. But I unzipped the backpack anyway. Inside were clothes, a smashed phone, and a wallet. No cash. Just a driver's license. The name was Mark something. I didn't recognize the face, but the expiration date said 2022. That was 3 years ago. I stepped back and looked around. Everything was too still, too quiet. I turned around and froze again. There was someone standing in the trees, Far off, maybe 80 feet, but I could see the shape. Human. Still. Not moving. I didn't call out. I didn't wave. I just watched. After a few seconds, the figure moved slowly to the right, behind a tree, and vanished. I grabbed the wallet and stuffed it into my pack. I had to get out of there. I moved quickly now, not caring about the noise I made. I just wanted distance. I didn't know where I was going, but I was following the sun. West, back toward the car, back toward anything. The forest grew darker. I didn't stop. I kept walking even after the sun dipped and the air turned cold. At some point, I started running, even though my legs were screaming. Around 9 p.m., I came to a road. Just a narrow dirt one, barely wide enough for a truck. I almost cried when I saw it. I followed it north, walking on autopilot. It was midnight when I saw headlights. A Forest Service truck came around the bend. I stepped into the road and waved both arms. The ranger inside rolled down the window and just stared at me for a second. I must have looked insane, dirty, pale, wild-eyed. He drove me back to the trailhead. I didn't say much, just that I'd gotten lost and something was wrong out there. He made me fill out a report. I handed over the wallet. The next day, a state trooper called me. They had opened an investigation. The name on the license matched a missing person from 2022. Hiker. Vanished in the same region. Never found. I told them everything. They went out there for days. Search teams. Drones. Dogs. They didn't find the camp. They didn't find the figure I saw. They didn't find anything. But they found the fire ring. They found the torn glove. And they found the shredded blue tent fabric. That was enough to reopen the missing persons case. As for me, I haven't gone hiking since. Not alone. Not even on a short trail. Sometimes I still wake up at night, heart racing, certain someone's standing in my room. But when I turn on the light, there's nothing. Just silence. Like the woods. Too quiet. Too still. I had been hiking solo for years, mostly on weekends, sometimes longer if I could get time off work. I liked the solitude, the slow burn of effort, the noise of my own breathing while everything else was still. I planned a 4-day hike through a stretch of mountain terrain in northern Idaho, part of a national forest that wasn't too well known, but not completely off the map either. It had a mixture of elevation gain, river crossings, narrow ledges, and switchbacks that twisted through thick forest. I had read a few blogs about it, watched some GPS footage, and printed out topographic maps since I don't like relying on my phone once I'm out in the backcountry. I packed light but safe. Food for 5 days, water filter, stove, tarp tent, rain shell, medical kit, and 2 small knives. One for camp tasks, one for emergencies. It started like every other hike. Parked my truck at a gravel trailhead. Locked it up. Left a small note with my route taped to the inside of the windshield. And stepped onto the dirt path with cool air brushing my face. The morning was overcast, but not threatening. I had about 15 miles to cover on the first day before setting up camp near a lake halfway up the mountain. That part of the trail was gentle, soft dirt, wide enough to move freely, a slow incline that snaked through tall pine trees and patches of brush. Squirrels darted through the undergrowth, birds flitted between limbs, and I passed a few muddy paw prints from what looked like elk or mule deer. After about 5 hours of steady hiking, I stopped near a stream to filter water and eat. My shoulders were sore, not bad, just tight from the pack. I stretched, refilled both bottles, and kept going. The trail narrowed as it started climbing more aggressively, cutting a sharp line up the slope. The switchbacks here were longer, and the trees closed in. The wind pushed through their tops and sent shadows shifting across the ground like fingers moving through dust. I liked the quiet. It made me feel separate from everything I didn't like about the world. Emails, noise, rush hour, politics, the general unease of being around too many people. I moved at my own pace and reached the lake around 6 p.m. It wasn't large, maybe a quarter mile across. Cold, dark water. No one was around. I checked for signs of campers. Ashes, wrappers, stacked rocks, but it was clean. I pitched the tarp near a cluster of boulders, hung my food bag from a branch away from camp, and sat by the water eating from a pouch of rehydrated beans and rice. That night, it rained lightly. I lay awake for a while, listening to the sound of water tapping the tarp. I drifted in and out of sleep, checking the corners for leaks, feeling the chill creep through the nylon floor. By morning, the rain had stopped, but fog clung low to the trees. It made everything quiet, like sound itself got muffled. I packed up, ate a dry bar, and followed the trail that curved up along the edge of the ridge. There was a part of this section I had marked on my map, about 2 miles of very narrow path with a steep drop on the right side and a sheer rocky wall on the left. It wasn't technical, but it required concentration. No room for stumbling. I took my time through it, planting my feet carefully, not rushing. I don't have a fear of heights, but I respect gravity the way I respect sharp tools. It's not the thing itself that's scary. It's what happens when your focus slips. After clearing the ridge, the trail dipped into a deep, shaded valley. Everything was wet from the rain, and the mud stuck to my boots like glue. It slowed me down more than I expected. I wasn't worried, just annoyed at the drag on my legs. I passed over 3 downed trees, one of which forced me to crawl under and smeared dirt across my pack. The air felt heavier the deeper I went. I figured it was just the low elevation, or maybe the lingering humidity from last night's rain, but I kept noticing small things that made me more alert. A broken piece of fabric stuck on a branch, a rusted tin can in the dirt, a faint boot print that didn't match mine. It's not unusual to find signs of other hikers, even in remote spots. People cut through all kinds of routes. Some go off trail for adventure or shortcuts, but I hadn't seen anyone in over a day, and the print was fresh. It wasn't just the print, though, it was the direction. It was angled slightly off the trail, into a denser section of woods that my map marked as steep and impassable. I stopped and looked at it for a while, then shrugged it off. People wander. I kept moving. I made camp that night on a flat rise above a creek. No visibility issues. I set my tarp tight, laid out everything in neat rows, checked the food bag, and sat watching the sun drop behind the ridge. I ate quietly and went to bed early. That night, I didn't sleep much. Around midnight, I heard something in the trees. Not close, not right at the edge of camp. Just a single heavy step on wet ground, then silence. I stayed still and listened. I thought maybe it was a deer or elk, but they usually move in groups or keep going. This felt slower. I lay with my hand on the knife under my sleeping bag, ears straining. I didn't hear it again. Eventually, I dozed off. Day 3 was supposed to be the hardest. I had to cross a high pass and descend into another valley that curved along a river for the last stretch. I woke up stiff, packed quickly, and got moving. About 2 miles in, I found something that stopped me cold. A sock. Not mine. Not old. Just a single black wool sock sitting in the dirt at the base of a tree. No blood.
No debris.
No pack or trash. Just a sock. I stood there staring at it, trying to make sense of it. Did someone drop it? Did they change clothes here? It didn't make sense. It was too random. I moved on, uneasy now. Not scared, just keyed up. I couldn't shake the feeling that someone else was out here. Not a fellow hiker, not someone following trail etiquette, but someone careless or maybe not mentally well. I scanned every bend in the trail, kept my knife clipped to my belt instead of packed, and checked over my shoulder more than I liked admitting. The pass was rough. Windy, exposed, steep. The view was wide but harsh. Jagged stone, pine needles caught in cracks, loose scree that made every step a gamble. I made it across by early afternoon and started down the other side, which was wetter, mossy, and shaded by close trees. I stopped for water at a spring and knelt down to refill my bottles. When I stood up, I noticed something in the mud next to the rocks. A single, deep footprint, barefoot, human, big. The toes were spread, the arch was deep, the heel print was clean. Someone had walked here barefoot, and recently, the edges were crisp. No animal makes a print like that. This time, my stomach flipped. I stayed there for a full minute, staring at the print, trying to listen. The forest was dead quiet. I didn't know what to think. Someone walking barefoot in the mountains? In spring? In terrain like this? Either they were completely out of it or trying to stay silent. Neither answer made me feel good. I kept walking faster now. I didn't run. That would have made noise. But I walked like I had somewhere to be. I skipped lunch. My legs burned, but I didn't stop. Every time the trail curved, I scanned it. Every rustle in the leaves made my hand twitch toward my belt. I didn't see anyone, but the feeling in my chest kept building, like pressure before a storm. I made camp near the river that night. It was a wide, fast-moving section with white caps and slick banks. I picked a spot farther from the trail than usual, behind a thick wall of trees and rocks. I didn't light a stove. I ate cold food, didn't hang the food bag, just kept it close. I slept with the tarp rolled halfway down so I could see out. I laid there until about 3 a.m., and then I heard it again. This time closer. A crunch, a pause, another step, then nothing. I waited, holding my breath. Nothing moved. I didn't sleep. The last day I was supposed to follow the river for about 10 miles until it looped back toward a gravel road. There was no reception, but once I hit the road, it would take another 2 hours to hike back to the truck. I packed before sunrise. I didn't eat. I didn't drink. I just moved. About 3 hours in, I saw a pile of rocks stacked on the trail. Not a cairn, not random, just 3 stones placed in a neat triangle. It hadn't been there when I came through. I hadn't taken this trail yet, but there were no others nearby. Someone had been here before me, and they wanted it seen. I stepped over it and kept going. About 2 hours later, I saw smoke. It was thin, white, rising from behind a cluster of boulders about 100 feet off the trail. I dropped to a knee and watched. Smoke, no sound, no voices, no movement. I couldn't see a tent or fire pit, just that faint, rising smoke, like from wet wood or something not burning right. I didn't go closer. I didn't want to know. I kept walking. It took another 4 hours to reach the road. My legs felt like rubber. My back ached. My neck was tight. I didn't stop until I was well down the gravel road, almost out of breath. I finally rested on a fallen log and drank the last of my filtered water. My hands were shaking. I've been hiking solo for years. Nothing fancy, just a weekend here or there to clear my head and get away from the noise. I worked a desk job that kept me boxed in 6 days a week, so on the 7th, I usually packed up, drove out early, and headed to the backwoods of wherever I could find on a map that looked isolated enough. This time it was a stretch of old trail in the northern Rockies I hadn't tried before. It wasn't on many apps, which I liked, and I'd only found it after scanning old USGS maps online and cross-referencing forums where backpackers talked about forgotten paths. They called it the Switchback Cutoff. It had been used decades ago as a connector trail but had been largely abandoned when the Forest Service rerouted traffic to a newer loop on the east side. That's what made it appealing. Quiet, overgrown, and forgotten. I left at dawn on a Friday. It was early October, the last dry stretch before winter set in up there. I parked my truck at a dead-end forest road where the trail supposedly started. There were no other cars. I double-checked everything: my pack, map, compass, GPS, and backup batteries. I'd marked 3 potential camp spots over the weekend and planned to be out by Monday morning. The first part of the trail was what I expected: dense pine, uneven rock underfoot, and thick brush crowding the edges. I had to stop every so often to make sure I hadn't drifted off course. Fallen trees blocked portions of the route, and I had to climb over or detour around more than once. The switchbacks were still there, but barely recognizable in places. Erosion had eaten away at the sharper corners, and runoff from recent storms had left sections slick with loose rock and mud. By late afternoon, I was well into the trail, far enough that the only sounds were wind through the trees and the occasional snap of a branch underfoot. I made camp near a dry creek bed, on a small rise that looked like it would keep me clear of cold air pooling in the valley. I set up the tent, boiled water, and ate dehydrated beef stew while the sun dropped behind the ridgeline. I watched it go without any real thought, just staring and letting my mind blank out. That night, something woke me. It wasn't a noise exactly, just the feeling that something had changed. I opened my eyes in the dark and just lay there, still in the sleeping bag, listening. The forest was quiet. No wind, no animals, just a dead stillness that didn't sit right. Usually, even at night, I'd hear squirrels or maybe the occasional owl. But not now. I stayed awake for another hour, just staring at the tent ceiling, ears tuned in. Eventually, I drifted off again. The next morning, I didn't think much of it. Maybe I'd just been wired from work stress and couldn't settle. I packed up, ate a protein bar, and got back on the trail. The second day was harder. More overgrowth, steeper terrain, and some sections where the trail had completely disappeared under fallen debris or overgrown scrub. I had to bushwhack with my trekking poles in front of me, pushing aside branches, thorns, and bramble. I checked my compass and GPS more often now, just to be sure I was still on track. Around midday, I saw the first sign that something wasn't right. A weathered tarp strung between two trees, sun-bleached and ripped. It wasn't mine, obviously. It looked like it had been there a while, months at least. Beneath it, the ground had been flattened by use, and there were remnants of a fire pit, blackened rocks, charred sticks, and the rusted remains of an old tin can. Someone had camped there, maybe even lived there for a stretch. I stood still for a few minutes, scanning the woods. Nothing moved, no sound. I waited, then moved on, a little more aware now, alert in a way I hadn't been before. By late afternoon, I found the second site. This one was more recent. A nylon sleeping bag, shredded open with the stuffing picked out and scattered. A sock, dirt-stained and stretched. A plastic spoon half buried in the dirt. I didn't touch any of it. I just crouched and looked. It didn't look like a bear had done it. I've seen bear sign before, claw marks, ripped packs, shredded tents, but this looked more methodical, more human, like someone had pulled things apart piece by piece and left them like that. I didn't camp there. I hiked another mile and set up in a low clearing near a rock outcrop. I tried not to think too much about the site I'd found. People abandoned camps all the time. Weather changes, plans change, gear breaks. It didn't necessarily mean anything, but I kept my knife close and didn't build a fire. I ate cold jerky in the dark, sitting against a log with my back to it so nothing could come up behind me. Again, something woke me in the night. This time I was sure it wasn't just a feeling. There'd been a sound, quick, sharp, like a footstep on dry leaves. I held my breath and listened. The silence stretched out again. My ears strained so hard I started to hear things that weren't there. The blood pumping in my head, my own breath, the creak of nylon as I shifted slightly. Then another step, not close but not far either. I reached for the knife without making a sound and waited. I didn't sleep after that. At dawn, I broke camp fast and moved. I didn't eat, didn't brush my teeth, didn't do any of the usual routines. I just stuffed everything into my pack and hit the trail. My plan had been to loop around another 5 miles before heading back down the long way. But I decided right then to cut the trip short and return the way I came. I was maybe 12 miles from my truck at that point. If I pushed hard, I could be out by sunset. But I didn't make it that far. Around late morning, I reached a section of trail I recognized from the day before. A split where the main trail veered down to the east and the switchback cutoff continued up the ridge. My plan was to follow it back exactly. But when I reached the fork, something was different. The trail I had come down from didn't look the same. The switchbacks were still there, but something had changed in the brush. The logs I'd climbed over before were gone, freshly moved, like someone had come through and cleared them or shifted them aside. I checked my GPS. It was glitching, blinking in and out. The compass worked fine, but the GPS kept losing signal. I tried waiting it out, standing still and holding it up, but the signal flickered, then cut out completely. I decided to go with the compass and memory. A mile later, I knew I'd messed up. The trail was gone, completely. I stood in the middle of a clearing, surrounded by thick pines and underbrush, and realized I'd been following a game trail, not the hiking path. It had felt right at first, narrow, winding, familiar, but it had veered west instead of south. I checked my map, tried to reorient, but nothing matched. The terrain had shifted enough that I couldn't tell what ridgeline was which. It all looked the same, tree after tree, slope after slope, rock and shadow. I tried backtracking. I followed my own footprints as best I could, looking for broken branches and scuffed dirt. But the forest didn't give anything up easily. After another hour of walking, I was more lost than before. I stopped and sat on a flat rock, drank water, ate some trail mix without really tasting it. My hands were shaking slightly. I told myself to stay calm, but my gut was tight, and every sound in the woods felt sharper now. Twigs snapping, wind brushing through branches, something rustling far off. I needed elevation. That was the only way to reorient. I marked a line on the map where I thought I was and started uphill. Took longer than I thought. The slope was steep, and the underbrush was thick. Branches tore at my sleeves, and my boots slipped on wet moss. I grabbed at rocks, roots, anything to pull myself up. Finally, I crested a ridge and got a clear view. Nothing looked familiar. No valley I recognized. No peak I could name. Just trees, ridges, and sky. And then I saw something down below, maybe 2 ridges over. A structure, small like a shack or hunting blind. It was mostly hidden by trees, but the shape was unmistakable. Straight lines, not natural. I marked the direction with the compass, guessed the distance, and started toward it. I didn't care if it was a ranger station, a trapper's shack, or even a hermit's cabin. It meant shelter, maybe help. Getting there was harder than it looked. I had to skirt around a small gorge and climb over a fallen boulder field. And by the time I reached the base of the ridge where the structure stood, it was nearly dusk. The light was fading, and I was sweating through my shirt despite the cold air. The structure was smaller than I thought, more like a shed than a cabin. Wooden, weathered, leaning slightly. There were no windows, just a door with rusted hinges and a loop where a padlock had once hung. The lock was gone. I knocked once, for no reason, then pushed the door open. Inside was a single cot, broken and sagging. A wooden crate with a lid. Empty cans stacked in a corner. The smell of mildew and old pine. I stepped in and closed the door behind me. I didn't sleep. I sat on the floor with my back to the wall, the knife still in my hand. I didn't build a fire. I didn't eat. I just waited. And sometime after midnight, I heard the footsteps again. Outside this